Okay, good morning and welcome to the Post Advisory Committee for Tuesday, June 3rd, 2025. I'm going to call this meeting to order, and if you could please stand for the flag salute and then remain standing for a moment of silence honoring officers who have lost their lives. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Please join me for a moment of silence honoring the officers who have passed away since the last meeting. Deputy Hector Cuevas Jr. of the San Bernardino County Sheriff's Department. Officer Osmar Rodarte of the Marysville Police Department. And Officer Samuel Riveros of the Baldwin Park Police Department. Thank you. Please take your seats. Okay, Miss Essex, will you please take roll call?
Good morning. Salazar. Advisory members Cordova.
Present.
Cottrell. Present. Herman.
Present.
Gamboa.
Present. Honey's present.
Morrell. Elborn. Present. Pacheco.
Present.
Ponce.
Present.
Rosa.
Here.
Salazar.
Present.
Everyone's present.
Thank you. I would now like to introduce Assistant Executive Director Jim Grotkow and Post Executive Director Manny Alvarez. Thank you. We will now move to public comment. This is time set aside for members of the public to comment on items on the advisory committee agenda pursuant to commission policy. The advisory chair will manage the public comment period in deference to the committee's workload and meeting time constraints. Up to 15 minutes is allotted at the beginning of each meeting for public comments on items on the agenda. Members of the public who wish to speak are asked to limit their remarks to no more than 3 minutes each. If we have many people who wish to speak on the same topic, I, as the chair, may intervene and will ask that you limit remarks to no more than 1 minute. Pursuant to existing commission policy, the chair may conclude the public comment period if multiple speakers are voicing repetitive or similar statements and the 15-minute public comment period has expired. Please be advised that the committee cannot take action on items not on the agenda. Please remember that this meeting is being transcribed, so I may politely interrupt and ask you to repeat or speak slowly and clearly so your comment can be correctly captured in the transcript. Is there anyone here who would like to address the committee during public comment? Okay, seeing none, we'll move on to the action items. So the first item that we have is the approval of transcript and action summary from March 4, 2025 Advisory Committee meeting. Before I move on to this, I just want to remind the committee again, we do have a court reporter transcribing the meeting. So as you make a motion or a second or a comment, please state your name prior to speaking so that she can record that accurately. Is there a motion to approve the transcript and action summary from the March 4, 2025 meeting?
So moved.
A motion, Oborn, is there a second?
Morrell, second.
Okay, are all those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Are there any opposed? And any abstentions? Okay, the motion passes unanimously. We'll now move on to announcements, and I'll call upon Assistant Executive Director Jim Grotkow to provide the announcements.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, and good morning, advisory members. We have just two announcements. The first one being tomorrow, we anticipate the commission voting on a new advisory member who represents the California Coalition of Law Enforcement Associations. He is a sergeant from Santa Ana Police Department and the president of their association. If he is approved by the commission tomorrow, then he would be at our next meeting, which is in December, I believe. The second is just a reminder that last meeting, you all voted and made recommendations on the Post Awards, and those will be presented tomorrow at the commission meeting by the commission and the executive director. So, and that's all I have for announcements, sir.
Thank you. We'll now move on to presentations. Assistant Executive Director Jim Grotkow will announce the agenda items to be presented. We have a pretty heavy load this morning, so for the committee members, please, as staff members come up to present these, be prepared for questions. These are all items that were pulled by the committee. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So we will be having presentations at the request of the advisory on every one of our items. So that'll be 2A through I, BTB, 3A through D, Training Program Services, TPS, 4A, Management Counseling and Projects Bureau, MCPB, 5A, Peace Officer Standards and Accountability Division, 6A and B, and Certifications Bureau, 7A, and Lab Legal Affairs Bureau, 8A.
Okay, thank you. So we will start with our consent items. The first item is item 2A, report on post non-reimbursable program, new agency, California Department of Public Health. And I call upon Bureau Chief Tom Chalk to provide this report.
Thanks.
You don't get to be public today.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Members of the committee, good morning. Tom Chalk, Bureau Chief, Training Program Services. This item is one that we do for commission every meeting. It is essentially what law enforcement agencies have requested to join the POST program during this time. In this particular case, we have the California Department of Public Health, Office of Youth, Tobacco, and Enforcement. And just real quick background on this particular agency, they restructured their department and formed the new agency. So that's why they are now applying for the program. And that's all I have for this one. Any questions?
Any questions or comments from the committee for Mr. Chalk?
Question, how many peace officers do they have?
38? Thanks, sir. Well, 38 investigators, but yeah, peace officers under 830.3.
Any additional questions, comments? Thank you. Okay, we'll now move on to item 2B, which is, and will continue to be Bureau Chief Tom Chalk, Training, Delivery, and Compliance Bureau will provide a report on course certification statistics.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just as item 2A before this item is presented to the commission each meeting. This report covers which presenters have joined the POST program, have left the POST program via decertification or voluntary, and how many courses we currently have certified. So to give an example, we currently have 5,967 active courses in our catalog. We also have 1,068 presenters. So just in comparison to this same time last year, we're up by 231 active presenters and up by 19 new courses. And so again, it's just a report of statistics we provide at every commission meeting. But happy to take any questions on that as well.
Questions, comments from the committee?
Campbell, I got a question. Sir, how do we keep track of an inventory of presenters? Like I've tried to track down private presenters through the POST website. Kind of struggling with that. Track meaning.
To find a mechanism in place to
Yeah.
differentiate between certain types of presenters, whether they're private or
Yeah.
affiliated with a law enforcement agency. I don't have that breakdown with me today. However, that's something that we certainly can provide to you. And as far as where to find that information easily, I can do it, but I'm not sure that it's something on the website. Maybe.
If I can interject, Jim Grotkow, we don't track them by private versus government versus college. So I think in our earlier conversation, I reached out to our computer services staff, and because we don't track it that way, we really don't have a mechanism to be able to say this is a private, this is a government presenter in our system as it sits now.
It's a daunting task. I mean, I even try to Google it to get contact information from some of these private presenters. I just find it that I should be contacting these POST certified private presenters and let them know that they have a voice at the advisory committee council. So that's my aim. So.
Sir. And through our regional LECs out in the field, we can convey that message to our presenters as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any additional questions or comments? Okay, thank you, Mr. Chuck.
Thank you, sir.
Our next item is item 2C, report on the update to discussion regarding the transferability of peace officer background investigation files between agencies. This time I call upon Staff Services Manager Kelly Sorosky, the Strategic Communications and Research Bureau, who will provide a report on this item.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, advisory members. The proposal of transferability of peace officer background investigation files between agencies was initially presented for discussion at the post-commission meeting in November 2024. This is an update to that item and is presented for further discussion. On April 28th, 2025, a meeting was held between Post and the California Police Chiefs Association regarding the transferability of peace officer investigation files between agencies. The following parameters were recommended by the California Police Chiefs Association. Background investigation transferability will only apply to peace officer applicants having a background completed within the last 12 months. The background investigation must have been conducted in accordance with current requirements. A background investigation update is required from when the background investigation was completed. The transfer of a background investigation file will be at the discretion of both employing agencies. The following is recommended by Post for consistency with current regulations. The 12 months will be determined by the signature of hiring authority designee date on the verification of qualification for peace officer form, Post 2-355. The initial investigating agency and the prospective agency must maintain copies of the transferred background investigation file. That's all I have. Do you have any questions?
I only have a question. So if one agency transfers the background to a subsequent agency, does the 12-month period start over again? Or if that peace officer were to go to a third agency, would the background have to be completed?
Good morning, Melanie Singley. I manage the selection standards program, Kelly's supervisor. As far as the background, it would be the same. It would be a brand, just as if you were hiring a person as a new employee. So it'd start over again.
Okay, so if you had one agency that did the background
Mhm.
and, you know, they worked for that agency for 12 or 11 and a half months and they went to a new agency, that background could transfer
Mhm.
to the second agency.
Correct.
And if they worked for the second agency for 11 and a half months, the same background could transfer to the third agency because it started over, correct?
Based on the recommendation thus far, yeah, that's something that has not been discussed.
No, I just wanna-
But that's something that, based on your comment, that's something that we need to absolutely consider when writing the regulation.
I just
Whether
wanted,
it can
I just wanted to
transfer-
understand when it starts over. So
For more than once, yeah.
it could transfer continuously as long as it's within the 12-month period of each one of those.
Since it wasn't discussed during the time, then that's something that we should discuss when we come up with regulation too, whether or not it can be transferred multiple times.
Okay.
Yeah,
Thank you.
yeah.
Salazar, though, but it would also have to be, the background would have to be updated from the time it was completed to the, so say they were the first agency for 4 months. The next agency that would have that background transferred would have to update that 8-month period, say.
Correct, yeah. The requirement that is part of that process is that they have to update it from when the background was complete, yes.
Jim Krakow. I think we're looking for direction also on that. So Sheriff, it wasn't talked about in the meeting, I believe, but it's something that would be of concern of that continuing moving timeline that could be of issue. So certainly if there's some concerns with that at this meeting right here that could be shared, that could be taken back, the commission will be hearing this as a consent item tomorrow. Once we get direction from the commission tomorrow, we'll move forward in whatever direction they would like us either to not do it, to make amendments to what was being proposed right now, or to put some kind of limits on the time, maybe putting a 12-month one and done potentially without any kind of update. I think we're open to what direction the field wants to do, and then certainly what the commission would like us to do.
So if I recall, there was some discussion around this when you have, say, for example, interim chiefs, right? Moving from one agency to another and trying to get that leadership position filled in a timely manner when you have to do a background over again. Is that my recollection correct about that? Yeah.
Yes.
Which was the impetus behind this. And I agree wholeheartedly that you're going to do some kind of updated background. Under those circumstances, if it's trying to facilitate interim chief positions or interim leadership positions to take care of that gap, I don't necessarily have a problem with it transferring from one entity to another, given the fact that there's going to be an update. I just wanted to understand if I was interpreting or reading that correctly, if the loophole I saw was in fact there.
So to clarify, this is not necessarily geared towards chiefs of police that are interim. So this is for your entry level or lateral officer that maybe is not successful on probation in the first agency, or chooses not to stay there, or something happens in the process that is not subject to like an SB2 problem, but they're leaving on good terms, but maybe just not a fit for that agency within that year's time.
Fair enough. Thank you.
Sure.
Brent Stalker, I have a couple questions. I'll try not to hit you with a compound question here, but my main concern is quality. So how, if you wouldn't mind discussing a little bit about the transfer process. So if one agency picks up another agency's background, and I can see in here that, you know, we've got wordage as far as current requirements, and then an investigation update is required. Could you explain that a little bit? How does that depart? How are we going to regulate if when the new department gets the background, if it's a quality background or not, if you're understanding what I'm asking?
I am. So part of that was like for the intern chiefs, for example, we do a compliance check ahead of time. So we know that they've met our requirements for this process. That wasn't part of what's being recommended. So we would have no way of knowing if there was a quote unquote quality background that was conducted until we do a compliance check kind of on the back end of that. So
the background would go through post and then it would be transferred to the new department. Am I understanding that right?
that's the requirement for interim chiefs. That's not what's being recommended for this particular process.
Okay, so put the chief aside. If we're talking about a lateral officer, just basic lateral officer, how would that process work? Would the background just transfer from department to department?
The background would need to be complete. So they would complete the background like as if they were hiring the individual. They would have to do the verification qualification form that indicates it was complete. Then agency A would talk with agency B, and if they were willing to transfer, agency A was willing to transfer to agency B and B was willing to accept it, they would accept that. Then agency B would have to do an update from when the background was complete. So there's no verification that it was that it meets post-compliance requirements at that point. That's kind of the recommendation moving forward, because if there's it's just a matter of time kind of issue.
Okay, again, my concern is it seems like we need to have some type of regulation, because if Department A, for instance, does a substandard background, and if I'm understanding this correctly, Department B could just accept that substandard background, and we could be missing a lot of viable information on a peace officer.
They would be taking that liability on their own. Yes.
Is there a way around that? Could we add something, or is to make sure that that doesn't happen?
I don't know, Jim, did you?
As it sits right now, there's no guarantee that can't happen, because if Post has not got out there to review the background files, they may be able to move from one agency to the next using that same background until they are there long enough when the consultant gets out to do the assessment. In the future, as we're moving towards an electronic background process, this will cut down our time significantly. It's still in the process. We're developing it through an EDI platform. The goal there would be that would be just days from the hiring that we would have eyes on it and be able to look at the backgrounds. But we're not there right now. So if the regulation moves forward today, in essence, and goes through the regulatory process, within the next several months, that it could be approved where they are allowed to move without Post ever having eyes. Because Post is not saying you have to send it to us first before you send it to the new agency. It would be if one agency wants to share it with the other one, and there is no mandate in the regulation. So if the first agency does not want to share it for confidentiality purposes or whatever reason, or the new agency doesn't want to accept it, there would be no mandate to do that. But as far as Post having eyes on the background, it's very possible that that doesn't happen yet by the time they're moving to the new agency.
Stalker, I appreciate that. Thank you. I personally would like, peace officer position is so important. I would like to see some type of regulation done between the transfers, just because I obviously wouldn't want any, substandard background being passed on a peace officer position. So again, I don't want to cause any extra work, but I just don't know if that's possible to put that into a transfer in the future.
So to clarify, for the sake of the notes for the chair, are you proposing that we would have a regulation that says Post has to have reviewed and approved it prior to being portable, or?
I would like to see that. I just think it's kind of, I don't want to use the word dangerous, but again, with a peace officer position, as important as it is, and I just would like to see some type of, in between Department A and Department B, some type of oversight to make sure that we're not just passing a substandard background on to the next department. And so, again, I don't know what that process would be, but I would personally, I'd like to just see some type of regulation in there to where somebody besides Department A and Department B has eyes on it.
Thank you.
Dr. I have a moment of clarification here. Just because Department B accepts the background, that doesn't preclude them from fleshing that out, correct? So if you did accept Department A's background and you felt that there was something missing, then the onus would be on your department to then go back and do that checks and balances. So whether or not they form a regulation or they make some sort of rubric for accepting the transfer, I think Department B would then look at the quality of the materials and make that judgment, right? And say, this background is completely acceptable. This meets the standard that we have for our particular agency. But if you do accept the transfer and say, hey, there's something missing that we like to do, that we like to look at, you'd still have the ability to go forth and seek that information out.
Pacheco, just a point for the commission, based on the sheriff's comments, it might be good to put in the language. I don't know how often it would happen, but if we have subsequent refreshers or updates to backgrounds, maybe some language that it would be important for each agency to get those updates from, it could be 3 or 4 times. So they would need to go back and get every agency who employed this person and their permission, essentially. So I can see that being missed. Even think of our backgrounds units, if it's 2 agencies ago and they just get the original. So again, maybe some language they would need every agency subsequent refreshers, essentially, if they accept that background. So it'd be a completed background.
There's a couple of issues here. There's one of them I want to vet out a little bit more. We talked about the quality of the background investigation, but the sheriff brought up a different point with the question to a transferability to a third agency. Would there be concern with, and I could see, I think personally there would, should there be a limit in the regulation as to how many times that original background can transfer or be portable? In other words, transfers once, but if there's another move again for whatever reason in that next 12 months, can the agency C now still use that original, or would they be required to conduct a new, fresh background? Does that make sense?
Yes.
Any feedback from the committee?
Stalker, I would agree with that. My other question, just to go along with Chair Salazar, what actually would be transferred? Would it be the polygraph background, the entire background, or is it only part of the background that would be transferred?
It'd have to be the entire background file.
So the polygraph as well, and anything that the department did as far as the background, the entire package would be transferred. Okay.
Merle?
What would happen if the candidate failed a portion? Say they failed the poly for one agency, would it then be sent to the next agency? Or as a partial packet, or would it
I
be?
think those would be discussions between those two agencies. We don't get into the specifics of like the details of what's in the background, but essentially it would be the premise behind it is that they would have passed the background. I think the initial example that was given when this was brought forth a couple months ago was you had an individual who passed the background, they were hired, they didn't quite make it through FTO. And now another agency wants to hire them and doesn't want to have to do a complete new background because one was just done, 4 months ago. So it's kind of the premise is that they would have passed the background. But that's a good question. That's a good point. That's something, again, we have to kind of discuss when looking at how to write this regulation, if this is something that the commission wants to move forward with.
I'm looking at this from an academy director's perspective of students who, I think our record is 89 agencies that a person applied for. And he actually got a job eventually. So I guess there's some place for everyone. But having said that, if the agencies aren't entitled to partial backgrounds, I would worry about candidates changing information based on why they think they failed the background.
Yeah, the requirement that we're asking that Post was recommending be added to the process would be that the agency does have to fill out the verification of qualification form, which essentially says that they've passed a background. So I don't know that would necessarily, but I don't know, we don't require a polygraph. So that's not listed on ours. So if they fail a polygraph, that could be something that could, essentially slip by, if you will.
Right, and then a psychological as well, because we all know that every agency has different standards.
That is
As a
part of the
psychologist.
verification of qualification
Okay.
form, though, is for background to be complete. For us to do a compliance check, they would look to see that there's verification that they pass med and psych. So that would be that's why we want that form to be in there, because that is essentially the agency saying this person can be hired because they passed all those, including med and psych.
Thank you.
Point of clarification, Honey, so in addition to within that 12-month period, the background being transferable, so too would a past medical and psychological?
Correct.
Correct.
And it's the date we're using for the 12 months is the date they complete that verification of qualification
I go through
form.
the background, they go through the medical, they go through the psych, they pass. The agency certifies that they are fit to be a peace officer, and then they could transfer that to a subsequent agency.
Right. That's why we want to use that verification.
And
form.
then
That
another
was-
one after that, another one after that.
Well, so it did, no, so it doesn't, so that doesn't allow them, they would still have to undergo med and psych. This is just solely for the background investigation.
Oh, so they'd have to go through the
Oh,
med cycle.
absolutely.
Oh, okay,
It doesn't exclude that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Just the form itself that we're recommending is included, the verification of qualification. That's an agency saying, we could hire this person because they've completed a background. We just haven't for whatever reason, or they didn't make it through FTO or what have you. They would still, going to another agency, they would still have to do med and psych. It
Okay.
would just be the background that's transferred, not medical and psychological.
I understand.
No.
Thank you.
Melanie, just for a point of order, the background is often considered the whole package, but it's not. The background is one component. If you could talk about that from the post perspective,
Oh, for the,
that the background
Background
is the background investigation versus the medical versus the psych.
right.
They're separate processes within.
Correct, yes. So
Sure.
there's different regulations. The background investigation is all of the, right, the physical kind of part, like contacting references and getting employment history and experience and that sort of thing, as well as, everything related to background, contacting neighbors, et cetera. And then there's med and psych. So those are three different regulations. This only applies to 1953, which is the background investigation. It's just on the form that we're recommending. It's that they've actually gone through. They're hireable. Let's put it that way. They've passed everything. They're at the hireable point.
Okay, any additional questions or comments on this item? Okay, seeing none, thank you for that report. Okay, I will now move on to item 2D, which is a report on the post-organizational wellness program. This time I call upon law enforcement consultant Raymond Nanadiego, Management Counseling and Projects Bureau, and Dr. Cassandra Viton, UC San Diego, who will provide a report on this item.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Good morning.
Dr. Cassandra Veaton, UC San Diego Research Director, is with me today and will provide a brief report on the university's perspective momentarily. The Post-Organizational Wellness Program was established to provide training opportunities and resources to help law enforcement agencies develop new or enhance existing organizational wellness programs for their sworn and professional staff to thrive in their personal and professional lives. Post entered into the 3-year contract beginning in 2022-2023 fiscal year with the University of California, San Diego Centers for Integrative Health to design and develop innovative strategies intended to help improve the health and well-being of peace officers and professional staff, and the goal to serve 30 to 60 agencies until the end of the contract. UC San Diego was also tasked to develop a research infrastructure to evaluate the impact of this organizational wellness initiative, provide virtual resources to further sustain the programs, and provide mentorship to departments and agency teams developed through the organizational wellness programs. We're glad to say that the 60 agency maximum limit was reached in September 2024 as Santa Barbara Police Department joined the program. Over 40 additional agencies expressed interest in participating in the program, but were unable to be served due to the limits of the current contract and were added to a pending agency list. UC San Diego provided subject matter experts to share insight into evidence-based wellness concepts for the law enforcement community and developed a new Post-Organizational Wellness Coordinator course. This course is was post-certified in March 2024, modified and updated in July 2024, and completed the quality assessment process in November 2024. This course either met standards or was above standards on the training evaluation course and instructor assessments. This course was presented 5 times at various locations throughout the state from between May to December 2024, and approximately 160 individuals from the 60 participating agencies attended the course. The participants were a diverse mix of sworn and professional staff, ranging from lineman level to command staff, including Sheriff Robert Johnson from Santa Clara County Sheriff's Office. The agency wellness teams received several weeks of mentorships following the course from UC San Diego as they developed and implemented their personalized agency wellness plans following the completion of the course. A group of subject matter experts were convened on February 18 to 20, 2025 at Post headquarters to review and update an unpublished guidelines document on organizational wellness. Publication and release of the new organizational wellness guidelines is anticipated for later this summer. The first Organizational Wellness Conference was held on May 20 to 21st, 2025 at the Hotel Farrah in Anaheim, and the maximum registration for that conference was reached in March 2025 and a waitlist was established. Approximately 165 law enforcement personnel attended the Organizational Wellness Conference from around the state. The conference provided the following opportunities for attendees: presentations and discussions with subject matter experts across the law enforcement community, health and wellness fields, and academia. Networking opportunities with professionals and other agency teams from across the state, strategies and ideas to help enhance the overall wellness of an agency's sworn and professional staff, a glimpse into the new organizational wellness guidelines, and CPT credit. Lastly, UC San Diego developed a new program with a virtual platform called 720 Health. This open source resource provides ongoing learning opportunities for agency personnel and wellness teams, including personalized learning pathways customized for individuals. UC San Diego will provide research findings on the correlation of wellness and our law enforcement industry by October 2025 following their data analysis. Now let me introduce Dr. Cassandra Veaton.
Thank you. I'm Dr. Veaton from UC San Diego, and it's been a great pleasure and honor to work with Post and with law enforcement throughout California State over the past 3 years. And on behalf of our team, I want to express our gratitude for the ability to do this. And so, oh, doesn't look like it's clicking. Oh, there we go. So all of you are very aware for the need for law enforcement. Let's see. Perhaps it is too far for the clicking, but all of you are quite aware of the need for law enforcement wellness. We know that these issues are becoming rampant and it's time for a change. And so it's been very gratifying to be able to work with the Organizational Wellness Initiative here. Yeah, I'll just do next slide, I guess. Okay, so can you go back to the last slide? Would you mind going back to the last slide? Thank you. So upon the rollout of this program 3 years ago, 485 agencies throughout the state expressed interest in participating. Next slide. And so in addition to reviewing all of the needs of all the agencies, we also conducted a thorough literature review of all of the scientific and academic literature across the country and what kinds of holistic wellness programs had been already used and what they learned. Next slide. We conducted interviews and focus groups across ranks and sworn and non-sworn throughout California State in order to get a very clear idea of what the needs and the barriers were to such wellness programs and how we might be able to learn from what's already been done and also create a strategy to address these needs and barriers. Next slide. And so we learned from these that a number of things, that we knew there needed to be leadership support. We knew that there needed to be not only a reactive or post-critical incident plan, but also a proactive and a prevention plan. We knew that it needed to be culturally competent, collaborative, and made with, by, and for law enforcement staff and aligned with LD 14 in the academy, that it needed to be confidential so that we could assuage any of the fears or concerns that might come from the staff or from the associations. We knew that it had to be evidence-based and grounded in science and data-driven so that we could course correct if we could see that some things weren't working. And then it needed to be sustainable and mission-driven. UC San Diego is another government agency. We're not for profit. So it's great to be able to offer these programs at cost as opposed to having to be concerned with making a profit off of these things. Next slide. And so the strategy we put together for the Organizational Wellness Initiative was that we needed to address things at the level of culture, training, and resources. Changing the culture of the agency is key. We can't just ask personnel to change in a vacuum. They have to have support from the agency from bottom to top. And then they also need to have tools and resources to be able to do it. Next slide. So our deliverables for this program were to enroll 60 agencies, to train at least 120 organizational wellness coordinators that would be placed at each agency, to train at least 20 mentors and post-course trainers for this organizational wellness initiative, to directly impact at least 5,000 to 10,000 law enforcement professionals, to provide an open source evidence-based law enforcement wellness curriculum, which we called 720 Health. 720 means keeping an eye on the 360 degrees around you as we're all trained in law enforcement, but also 360 degrees inside of you, keeping yourself well and healthy. We developed a step-by-step agency wellness plan guide. We did demonstrate, and we know that we needed to demonstrate effectiveness at the individual and the agency level. Today, I'm going to be giving you an interim progress report, and in October, we'll be able to present more of the research findings and to leave a replicable and sustainable program designed to reach all California agencies. Next slide, please. Next slide. Go ahead and do the next slide. Sorry, guys, this is a little bit of a delay between slides here. Go ahead and skip through these, please. So the program that we've developed is based on health domains, including awareness, stress reactivity training, purpose and exercise, nutrition, social connection, and sleep and rest. These are our core domains. There are other domains that are addressed, but we know that if we can get folks moving, eating well, resting and sleeping, connecting socially, having stress reduction techniques, and aligning with a larger purpose, that this is going to be the best evidence-based way for them to maintain their health throughout their career. Next slide. So we have reached, as Raymond said, 60 agencies, over 40 are on the waiting list. We already have a post-certified course planned for August to be able to capture some of these 40 agencies. And we are already being contacted by Border Patrol, ICE, and people from other states. So please click through all of these very quickly. These are some of our trainings that we held with all of the folks who came to learn to be organizational wellness coordinators. They were highly experiential in alignment with the highest level of adult learning and taught by several postmaster instructors. They received very high rankings from participants, some of whom said it was some of the best and most useful course training that they had received to date. We did create this agency wellness plan worksheet, which is a 40-page document that guides people through assessing the needs at their own agency, setting priorities and goals for their wellness program, how to launch it, how to raise money for it, how to get association support, and then each step of the plan over the next year with a budget. And this was very, very helpful to people. We offered over 2,500 hours of mentoring across the program. And so all of the agencies got multiple hours of mentoring from senior law enforcement officials who had been experienced in setting up wellness programs at their own agency. And so they would not only fill out this plan and take it back, but they would get individual mentoring once they got back. They would have an assessment and then they would be allowed to apply for a grant. So we've been able to grant 45 agencies with multiple kinds of things that they can use in their agency, from exercise supplies to other resources, et cetera. Next slide. Okay, next slide. Okay, next slide, please. We were able to then take people into this individual program. So that was the agency level that I just told you about. Next slide. And then at the individual level, we created a curriculum that can be delivered online, live on Zoom, or in person. And this is, please just keep clicking through. Thank you. It includes all of these various elements, up to 24 hours of training with multiple resources for referrals. And each person can sign up for the program, take a small quiz to find out where they need the most help with their health. They receive an online dashboard. You can just keep clicking through. Thank you. And that will give them a personalized plan for their health. They can use it on the desktop, on mobile, on an app. And so as they take this baseline wellness assessment, they get their assigned courses. They have 12 weeks to complete them. This is also confidential, so this is protected by a federal certificate of confidentiality, and they are given reminders every week in a newsletter to help them keep going. They also receive text messages 5 to 7 days a week. That's a very, very fast 1-minute text message that says, hey, check in. How are you sleeping? How are you doing on stress? How are you doing on your eating? How are you doing on connection? And it allows us to collect data through the whole 12-week period. There were about 850 people who took advantage of a wearable Fitbit that collected data on a 24/7 basis so that we could have you can stop here, thank you. We can have objective measures of whether they're sleeping, whether they're actually exercising, things like that. And so they also had measures at the beginning, middle, and end of the program where we're looking at, were we able to affect the target behaviors such as better sleep, better physical activity, et cetera. Next slide. And then will that in fact result in what we hope it will result in: better health, quality of life, physical health, depression, anxiety, well-being, stress resilience, lower burnout, and reduced PTS symptoms, post-trauma. Next slide. You can just skip through these. Thank you. So the Federal Certificate of Confidentiality says that if these records are subpoenaed, we will not need to provide them. Okay, next slide. And so we did in fact meet all of our goals. Next slide. Sorry for the pain, everyone. The course satisfaction metrics for the organizational wellness coordinator course, as you can see, were all over 87%. And as I said, these were very, very, very well received courses. Next slide. Okay, and we did learn some lessons throughout this. So we have been able to build in some course corrections over time and, solve some of the limits of marrying two government technology platforms that made it difficult. So if any of you were in the room, tried this at the beginning, we know that there were some difficulties there, which have been addressed now. I'm going to stop with the pain of the slides and let anybody ask any questions they might want to. Thank you.
Any questions or comments from the committee?
I have a couple questions. Great presentation. Thank you very much, Cordova with the California Community Colleges. And I also sit on a healthcare advisory committee called HCI Wellness. And Wellness Coach is one of the primary emphasis that we're really pushing out through. So I love the work that you're doing. I really want to commend that elevated component of it. But I also wanted to inquire, if you said you had 120 wellness coordinators, is there a way to embed the accredited credentials out of that, more specifically the wellness coach certifications behind that in that way? Because there's two levels, level 1 and level 2 for the universities as well.
Yeah, I think that would be fantastic. We do teach some wellness coaching skills in the 5-day training, but nothing compared to, I'm sure, what your program involves. The only thing I would add is that there's still some concern among personnel that their interior people might not hold their confidentiality, et cetera. So probably the better approach is to say, can we have some of these wellness coaches be statewide and be deployed as a statewide resource for all of these organizational wellness coordinators, so that if somebody comes up and says, hey, I'm having trouble doing any of this, I'm too stressed, or I just can't do it, they can be hooked up with a statewide wellness coach who's not a member of their agency, so they can really be open about what their struggles are.
I might also add, sir, that one of the beautiful things about the course that was developed with UC San Diego is that it introduces a lot of the evidence-based concepts. It takes the agency wellness plan, but at the heart of it, we know that it can't be a cookie cutter, one size fits all plan for every single agency across the state. So it really takes into account the nuances and what is most meaningful to the agency's sworn and professional staff, and opens the gateway to more. And then UC San Diego has started, I might be stepping a little bit ahead of this, is WellNet. We really believe in the power of regional networking among agencies, specifically on this topic. I've talked to some agencies where they've operated kind of in silos on this. There's some counties where they are already banding together on organizational wellness. And so UC San Diego has done a great job of kickstarting the WellNet for our industry. And so I would encourage all the agencies to really start embracing that.
So the first meeting of WellNet will be on June 18th. And this is a meeting of all of the organizational wellness coordinators across the state, which will be meeting quarterly to share best practices, and then we'll create a website and resources statewide. We also have a lot of resources right now available that are completely no cost and no enrollment and anonymous on the 720@health.ucsd.edu website, which will be linked from the Post Organizational Wellness website. But I'd love to talk to you more about wellness coaching.
Definitely. So likewise, I was going to say the same thing. If you could share your content and the information as a representative for the state on the wellness side of everything, see what we can do to collaborate and partner on that.
Great.
Additional questions?
I just had, sorry, Cottrell. I had one additional question about your 720 Health app. Is the intention to eventually roll that out to all agencies, whether or not they're able to participate in this fledgling program?
Correct, yeah. And so UCSD, as I said, is a government agency. It's nonprofit, but it will be at cost. So we won't be able to do it completely free. We'll have an entire set of resources that are free, and then the rest of it will be at cost.
And how are you going to ensure that the users of the app are agency specific and not public at large? is that going to be done through?
Oh, we will still work through agencies.
Okay.
Yeah, so the agency will sign up and then their staff will have access to it. Yeah.
Appreciate the work.
I guess I'll say one more thing, which is just that we've been incredibly gratified by the embrace of the agencies of these programs. And, you know, we were told initially you're going to hit a lot of resistance, and we had a lot of conversations with a lot of agencies, and they just said, when can you get here? So there's a lot of readiness out there.
I want to thank you, because I'm one of the fortunate of the 60 agencies that we've been a participant in the program. It's been fantastic for our organization. We've had a lot of very good participation. A lot of people run around with Fitbits competing with those. But it's been very good for the organization. I just think it's a really good program. So I encourage anyone to take advantage of those resources. But so thank you. Any other questions or comments from the committee? Okay, thank you for that report. Okay, our next item will be item 2E, a report on canine guidelines. At this time, I call upon law enforcement consultant Michael Dallasay, Management Counseling and Projects Bureau, who will provide a report on this item.
Morning, Mr. Chair. Good morning, members of the board. My name is Mike Dallasay, and I'm a consultant with Management Counseling and Projects Bureau. And today we'll talk about a proposed amendment to existing regulations specifically for law enforcement apprehension canines. Post recently revised and published the canine guidelines, as you may have seen, in around March of this year. Before that, it was last updated in 2014. Now, current legislative proposals, specifically AB 400, underscore the necessity of aligning canine training with industry best practices. Now, what I'm proposing here is a meta-analysis that establishes minimum training standards and course content for canine handlers and their supervisors, with a particular emphasis on strictly apprehension techniques. Several legislative proposals have been introduced concerning law enforcement canines, as I mentioned, AB 400. And a review of the existing regulations is recommended to ensure compliance and consistency. Just a little background refresher on AB 400 and what the proposal is. This has recently passed the Assembly and is headed to the Senate. It was introduced in 2025-26 this year, and it seeks to enhance oversight for law enforcement canine programs by mandating standardized training protocols and reporting requirements. So essentially what we're trying to do here is to get ahead of this and standardize best practices for apprehension canines throughout the state. Now, this regulatory review is essential for upholding high standards within the law enforcement canine programs. And your support in this will contribute to the effectiveness, professionalism, and accountability of said programs. This was really just an update, and I now open it to any questions.
Questions or comments?
Question, Honey. You said the training would be for the canine handler and their supervisor? Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
When you say the supervisor, you're talking about for example, the patrol sergeant on the team? And where would
Yes.
that training be delivered? Would it be delivered in the supervisory course, or would we have to send the patrol sergeant to a separate course just to cover the canine issues?
Those are great questions, and those are the ideas we've been kicking around with lab. And again, the meta-analysis, we're hoping to discover best practices because there are a couple of different options there, whether it's rolled into existing canine handler supervisor, and then defining who the supervisor is. Is it the supervisor of the overall canine program? Or as we know, canine units, they can vary shifts, so they have a multitude of supervisors. And so will each supervisor then have to undergo this training. But these are all issues that we are considering and are open to advice and input as well, so we can really have a well-rounded result.
Well, if you determined that the supervisor in question is the supervisor of the shift that the canine deputy or officer is working on, that could be any patrol supervisor, be it sergeant or lieutenant. And it seems to me that not having seen the regulations is probably centered around when a canine can be lawfully deployed and whether or not a supervisor should intervene. But I would like to see if that becomes part of the regulation, that be incorporated in the standard supervisor supervisor course that all frontline supervisors have to go to, as opposed to some standalone course that would require supervisors to go not only the supervisor course, but then this subsequent course as well.
Thank you. Thank you for that. And I would just reiterate that these recommendations are currently in the revised guidelines. And that's kind of our guiding light, if you will, on how we're going to approach this analysis.
Sheriff, if I can interject also, Mike, Jim Grockel. I think the model we would look at would be similar to like a field training program supervisor, where although there may be sergeants on shifts that have K-9 officers working, there's generally at an agency, there's going to be somebody assigned as their coordinator or their supervisor. And I think that's the target, if I'm correct, Mike, on
Yes.
who we're looking at. I mean, in some agencies, you may have K-9s working on in every station house and bigger agencies, but there's still going to be a designated person that oversees the program.
Yeah, and that changes the analysis. I understand wholeheartedly if it was your K-9 coordinator that was going to go, the person, but if it's every supervisor, then that becomes much more challenging.
Tend to agree. And another question, Mike, can you hit on what training is going to be looked at regarding this? Like 1070 training at all, or?
Yes, specifically 1084, Regulation 1084. So that's what we're looking at, and where it fits in there. But don't be too your question is not lost on me, because this has sent us down some rabbit holes as well. And so I appreciate you verbalizing that.
And Mike, that the course would have minimum content, correct? There would be topics or specific topics that every presenter would have to cover.
Correct.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jim.
Brent Stalker, couple questions, and actually it kind of goes along with training. Can you explain, so if this takes place, can you explain how current K-9 officers would be trained? Would they have to go back through a school? And my second question is I'm not sure how many K-9 schools that we have in California, but I'm curious as to, is there going to be like a train the trainer for our current K-9 schools? How would that roll out?
Ideally, yes, it would be a train the trainer. And going back to the former question of existing K-9 handlers, and that this also depended on which regulation, because with 1070, there are other requirements that require you to undergo update training, and so it could fall under there as well. So like EVOC or range, perishable skills, essentially.
Brent Stalker, yeah, to just suggest that if something needs to fall under that, if this is a lot of work went into this, and I'm definitely for it. I just think we need to have some type of regulation on for current K-9 officers.
Absolutely.
Member Stalker, if I can just address that, generally when we do a new regulation, we will grandfather in people that are already doing the job, because there's no regulation that required them to have training before. And what we normally do, I think is to your point, would be we would have an update requirement, and within 4 years or something into that timeline, we would have them be mandated every 4 years to go to some kind of update training, where they would then get caught up, and everybody from then on would be up to speed on the training requirements. But obviously Mike is working on that, and there's very open to what suggestions are out there for a model to use. So.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Is the update requirement already part of what's being proposed?
Yes, it is. It's on the table. Updating the update requirement, and then the trainer, who's going to certify the trainer. Yes.
Yeah, I would tend to agree that there should absolutely be an update requirement as part of the regulation. Okay, any other questions or comments? Okay, seeing none, thank you for that report.
Thank you.
Okay, we've been going about an hour. We're gonna give our court reporter a quick break. Does that work? How about 10 minutes? So we'll take a 10-minute break and we'll reconvene at 11:10. Thank you. Okay, we'll call the meeting back to order. Our next report is going to be a report on certification, decertification update. I'll call upon Bureau Chief Christine Ford from the Professional Conduct Southern Bureau and Bureau Chief Michelle Weiler from the Certification Bureau, who will provide a report on this item.
morning, everyone. Okay, so we are going to start off with our peace officer certification statistics. Perfect. So as you can see, we have, as of May 15th, we have a nice even number of 3,000 separations so far this year. It's actually a little higher now when I checked this morning, but as of May 15th, we had 3,000 separations. We currently have 82,161 full-time peace officers. We've issued 1,550 basic certificates, and we have approved 2,729 appointments. Again, that is inclusive of individuals who are lateraling from one agency to another because they're new appointments to that agency. The 3,000 would all separations would also include those who are separating for the purpose of lateraling as well. We've issued 2,034 proofs of eligibility. That includes not only our brand new peace officers, but our jail deputies and our reserve peace officers who don't already have basic certificates. Of the affidavits of separations we've received, 157 of them have been related to some form of serious misconduct allegation, and they represent 119 individual peace officers. And then a little box to the bottom right there, you'll see our the counts for the different allegations of serious misconduct. Again, some of these, the numbers won't necessarily add up to the 100% that you would see if you were to look up 157 cases. They may be more than that because some officers may have multiple counts or allegations. Next page. So here's a breakdown of the actions we have taken so far this year. You can see we've issued a total of 37 temporary suspensions. We have removed 18. Part of that is based on a withdrawal by an order of the executive director. And part of that is also when we've had to withdraw the ITS in order to actually revoke the certification. So one action is replacing the other. We've had 21 individuals voluntarily surrender their certificates. Again, these statistics are as of May 15th. We have revoked 18, and we've deemed 12 individuals ineligible to be peace officers in California based on prior convictions identified in Government Code Section 1029, which were prior to the implementation of SB 2 in January of 2022. Next. Here are some statistics based on the peace officers we have taken action against their certifications. You can see the breakdown of male to female, ethnicity, age distribution, years of service. And previously the commission, and I believe this body also had asked for a comparison with statewide demographic, statewide demographics. Our next slide. These are some general breakdowns for statewide representation. More males than females in the profession, more males than females having their certifications receiving some sort of disciplinary action. And the next few slides are just a breakdown of what's in the larger chart that you have, just to make it easier to see. Mostly for people in the audience who don't have a copy of this. Next slide. These next two slides are data that have been asked for by the commission that we'd not previously presented because we're working on ways to refine this data, make it less messy, so to speak, where the commission asked for information regarding college education. And just the caveat is that the information that we have is only as good as what's provided to us at the time of a certificate application. So anytime a peace officer is applying for an intermediate or higher certificate, professional certificate, that's when we're getting this information on their college information. It's possible it's not completely accurate for each peace officer, right? If you only require a bachelor's degree at the time or you have a bachelor's degree, let's say, and you're applying for your intermediate and your advanced at the same time, then that's what we're going to use for every professional certificate after that. It's possible this officer has gone on and completed a master's degree and even a PhD or a JD, and we wouldn't necessarily have that reflected here. The other caveat to the data that is before you, so this first one is specifically statewide data. The other caveat is that people could have multiple degrees that they've submitted to us. And as you can see at the top, where there's multiple selections for rank, sex, ethnicity, agency, and in the live data on the web page, we can toggle that information and discern and break it down. I didn't do that for this presentation because we'd have lots and lots of slides, but we could break that information down even further if there's any curiosity on males versus females in the profession, you know, police officers versus deputies versus sergeants, et cetera. We can break all that down further. This is not public on our public side yet because we want to make sure that this body as well as the commission has an opportunity to look at it, ask any other questions, ask for additional clarifying data before we put it out to the public to view. And then the next slide, I see Chief Honey, you look like you've got a question. Sheriff, sorry. The next slide is specific to the peace officers who we have taken action against their certifications. So again, it's a breakdown based on the information we have in EDI. Sheriff, do you still have a question?
Yeah, thank you very much. So if I go back to the last slide, if you don't mind terribly. So, and it's hard for me to read, but you're only tracking, correct me if I'm wrong, you're only tracking people with some degree, associate's degree or higher, is that correct?
There is oh, actually, yes, this data is only some degree. Our original version, which we will have to slide back in here, our original version did include some college because you don't have to have a degree necessarily to apply for your intermediate and advanced, you just have a certain number of credits. So in a previous iteration, we did have that. We'll have that's a good catch. Thank you.
Yeah, no worries. Because I'm interested to know, because the basic requirement is high school graduation or GED, right? That's the minimum requirement. And so I'm curious to know the number. There's some 83,000 peace officers in the state of California, I think was the number that you had. 82,000 peace officers. I'm interested to know how many of them have a high school degree or high school graduation only, as opposed to no college at all.
I'm not sure we would be able to discern just the high school because again, it's based on what's reported to us in EDI when peace officers are applying, but we could at least discern for those that we have information for who has some level of college education, but not necessarily a degree.
And if we move to the next slide, and the reason I say that is because I'm not necessarily sure why the commission asked for this data, but based on this slide and the next slide, it would seem to me that there's some operating theory or wanted to explore whether or not peace officers with higher degrees are less likely to engage in misconduct.
Yeah, I think this is related to the previous legislation that requiring the minimum education. And they just wanted to see, you know, over time, do we see any correlation?
Right, but without the understanding of how many people just have the high school graduation, it's hard to draw from that. So based on that, if that's the goal, have you drawn any conclusions yet? Or is it too early? Too early?
Well, based on a preliminary, non-professionally scientific research, I would say there's not necessarily a correlation between higher levels of education and misconduct. As you can see, if we go to the, oh, this is the misconduct page.
Yeah.
I mean, there's they look relatively similar,
Yeah.
right? In terms of police officers and deputies with degrees versus males and females with degrees versus the statewide demographic for that. So without really diving deep into this, I would say there's not necessarily, the higher your education, the less likely you are to engage in misconduct. But that's not scientific. Yes, ma'am.
Tammy Morrell, CADA. If we go down the road of some college, one thing that we probably would need to consider is, was there some college gleaned as a result of either academy training and advanced officer training that's many times affiliated with colleges versus someone who on their own went out and got part of a degree or took classes at a college level?
Yeah, and that is, my team is gonna hate me for this. That is something we probably can discern, but it would take manpower, because they do provide us with their transcripts, and we would be able to see on those transcripts what was issued in terms of courses that they actually completed, what was for the academy, and then also what was for in-service training, because there's potential to earn credits for in-service training as well. So we would be able to do that. I don't know how long it would take us to break that down and give you that information, but that is possible.
I would venture to guess that almost every police officer in the state of California would have some college based on advanced officer training and academy training.
As long as they fill out the forms, right? And then I don't believe we have a slide for this, but before I turn this over to my partner, Christine, if there's no other questions on this, we did have 3 individuals since March that we have deemed ineligible to be peace officers based on disqualification and Government Code 1029. We normally throw this up there for you, but since there were only 3 individuals, we did not. Those individuals are John Balian from formerly Glendale PD, Robert Longden Jr., formerly of Simi Valley PD, and Raymond Ramdahal, formerly of LAPD. You guys should have this at least in your packets, but.
Did have a question with regards to the chart on the right, the number of peace officers with degrees by rank misconduct. What period of time is that? Does that represent?
These should represent all active peace officers currently in our electronic data interchange.
In terms of the misconduct, it's not just for 2025, it would be for
Yes,
what, for entire SB2?
correct.
Thank you. Any other questions for Michelle? Okay.
Okay, good morning, Mr. Chair, some advisory members. I'm Christine Ford, and I will be providing the disciplinary action statistics and outcomes. To date, we've taken over 35,000 agency misconduct reports. You can see the breakdown by year. I'll start with 2023. As you can see, we took the bulk of our cases the first year that we started. 47% of those are retro or look back cases. As you can see, we leveled out considerably in 2024 with 10,000. And as you can see in 2025, we're online to basically meet about 10,000 reports. Of those reports, there was 40,000 reported allegations among 20, which are specific and unique to 20,000 law enforcement officers, which has already been mentioned earlier. We have over 82,000 peace officers in the state. Our top 3 allegations remain the same since the beginning of SB2, and that's physical abuse, demonstrating bias, and abuse of power. We're just short of 2,100 public complaints. And you can see the breakdown by year. When we started SB2, we only took 456 public complaints. But as you can see in 2024, it raised over 1,000. And I would anticipate this year we would be around that same number. Next. 33,000 cases. As you are already aware, cases mean basically that a person has been assigned that case to work. The breakdown on those are 13,000 are open, and you can see the breakdown, which is with open with post versus open with agency. As you know, when it's open with agency, usually it's either told for a criminal case or the agency is still working on completing the IA investigation. We've closed over 20,000 cases, which is 20,000 closed cases, which represent about 60,000 of the cases that we have. The slide's going to show you the cases of sustained agency findings. You've heard this term before in prior meetings. We usually classify those as priority 1s or priority 2 cases. We've closed thus far 1,100, a little over 1,100. And you can see the breakdown as far as why we closed those cases. Not serious misconduct was 51%. Not clear and convincing, where we determined we could not get to that threshold, is 36%, and non-actionable are 13%, which basically means those were cases that we got prior to, we could not act on based on the year it occurred.
Question, Tony?
Yes, sir.
On the non-actionable cases, do you stop your inquiry once you determine that it's non-actionable? Or do you look into it to determine whether or not, had it been actionable, you could have sustained violations? Does that make sense?
Yeah, under most circumstances, if we know that we cannot take action on the case based on the date of when we receive the IA, we would stop that investigation and close it.
Yeah, resource allocation, I understand that. But that said, of those 330 cases, we don't know that had they been more thoroughly investigated, and I'm not suggesting you should, given that, that they might have fallen into the not serious misconduct or not clear and convincing evidence, correct? It doesn't necessarily mean there are 330 cases of misconduct.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
This slide shows our cases that are not sustained, unfounded, or exonerated, which we've heard the term priority 3 cases. We've closed over 12,000 of those. Here's the breakdown for that. Not serious misconduct is over 95%. Majority of our P3 cases, it just does not pertain to serious misconduct. 2%, we could not get to clear and convincing. And again, that's that non-actionable, which is 3%. When we have sent a letter of notice of intent to revoke, this is kind of the breakdown. As you can see, 25 of those were default revocations. That indicates that the officer was sent that letter and within that 30 days did not respond, which becomes a default revocation. 15 of those have requested a review or an appeal. So those are all in the process. We do have 10 cases right now that they're within that 30-day window. So we're waiting to determine whether they're going to respond or not. One was a default suspension. One ended up becoming a government code 1029 disqualification. And then we had one surrender during that whole process. Next. With those same 53 notice of intent letters that we sent, this is kind of just a breakdown to give you an idea of what the agency did with those cases, which indicates obviously the agency has responded with discipline. So that gives you a breakdown, and then the misconduct allegation, whether it occurred on duty or off duty. I would like to have you look at that pie chart where the 2 top allegations that we have for these cases are acts that violate the law and dishonesty. So completely different than the allegations that you're seeing agencies come in with, where we saw on the first slide. This indicates these are the cases that are actually making it through the process, and 2 different allegations. This next slide gives you an idea for our POSAD board. We've had 4 board hearings, 15 cases heard. This gives you a breakdown of what that advisory board has come to. 12 recommended revocation on 12 of those cases. 2 of them, they recommended settlement, and 1 suspension. This next slide will show you the post commission and their recommendations on the same cases that the advisory board did here. They recommended 8 of those cases for revocation, 4 for settlement, 2 for no action, which basically means it was closed at that point, and 1 for suspension. This just gives you an idea of what each case, whether the board recommended something in the commission, but the two bullet points there on the top says the board reached a different determination from the division, which is us, 3 times. And the commission has reached a different determination from the board recommendation 5 times. Certification actions based on felony convictions. Michelle kind of just covered this, but briefly, we've had 123 disqualifications, which were ineligibles. Again, ineligibles are prior to 2022. And then we've had 103 revocations based on felony convictions, which obviously has occurred after 2022. And our last slide shows total revocations. We've had 103 1029 revocations. We've had 25 default revocations and 2 default revocations, which was a failure for a notice to defense, which basically means those 2 cases were in the process of going to the ALJ and they defaulted at that point. And that's in conclusion.
Tony, question.
Yes, sir.
That's 103 decertifications that we said?
From Government Code 1029 revocations,
Okay, what's the total number of revocations you've had then?
130.
130. And is that from the beginning of time, so to speak, when this all came in?
Yeah, the statistics that Christine is presenting is total number.
Total, yeah.
The data that I presented to you earlier is just since January 1st of this year.
That's what, I just want to make sure I understand.
Mhm.
So since the beginning of SB2, 130 decertifications have occurred.
Yes.
Yes.
Sorry, I had to look at that chart real quick. Yes, based on revocations with the commission actions and any revocations that would have occurred based on a felony conviction identified in Government Code Section 1029 after January 1st, 2022.
Right, after the implementation of SB2,
Mhm.
of the some 80,000 cops,
Yes.
you've concluded that 130 of them should no longer be cops.
Yes.
Okay. It's just, I'm not trying to trick anybody here. I'm just,
No, I was just looking at the numbers to make sure that the math was.
yeah, fair enough. Okay, I just want to understand the landscape here. Okay.
Kind of early in the morning for me to do
That's
math in
okay.
my head, sir.
I will get you coffee next time. Let me know. So it's interesting to me, and I don't know that we yet have enough data, but it'd be really interesting to see how this profession of law enforcement compares to, say, other professions like attorneys or doctors who are also subject to similar disciplinary requirements. And it'd be interesting to see the number of attorneys who have been disbarred versus the number of doctors who have been their license have been taken away versus the number of cops. I'd love to see what that would look like. Maybe someday we can evaluate that.
Probably real estate agents too. Real estate agents.
So Salazar, on the total revocation, so 130 that have already had action taken, how many are still pending?
Well, we have 10 cases that are pending appeal. 15 are in this hopper right now with going through the process. And then we also obviously have cases that are being prepared right now for.
And how many, do we know the total since the beginning of SB2, the total number of unique officers identified in reports of serious misconduct?
Don't recall. It's somewhere in your stats.
20.
Yeah, it was roughly 19,000 unique officers. So to answer your question about generally 20 years doing healthcare licensing, so usually about 10% of the overall population ends up through some course of investigation for what we would call deviation of standard of care, unprofessional conduct, some sort of complaint, charge, or allegation for the practice of medicine. And then of that, you look at usually about 1 to 5% end up in a disciplinary proceeding where they're going to an administrative hearing, there's some sort of disciplinary action. The one thing I want to note that's not included in the revocations. There's, 130 revocations, but we have officers that surrender. So you have to look at cumulatively. I don't remember what 2023 was, but there were more surrenders in 2023. And then we have 70 some odd in 2024. So throughout the course of the investigation, we will send a notice of investigation to the officer. And at that point, they kind of know that Post is looking at them, that there's probably a there, or we wouldn't be sending a notice of investigation if it looks like it might be serious misconduct. And at that point, the officer has an opportunity to surrender. And so we do see a fair amount of those cases result in surrenders of the certification, which means the investigation stops, it's over, same as a revocation. Chair Salazar, you asked like how many are pending? Well, there's still, I mean, when you say pending with Post, pending with the agency, that's another thing that I think it's good for us to clarify. When it's pending with the agency, that doesn't mean we haven't done anything yet. A lot of those cases that are pending with the agency hasn't completed the IA, but we still may have taken some action in the form of an immediate temporary suspension. So there's already an action on the part of Post. Michelle went over the immediate temporary suspensions, but right now, there's still a number of cases that are pending with Post in terms of investigation, and we're about 6,600. When we look at those, I think it's fair to mention, we've talked about this in the past, and I want to mention it again. How many of those cases would we consider priority one cases that really look like they're going to amount to something? Probably about 1,000, maybe a little less than 1,000 cases that look meritorious. There's something there that we need to investigate. I think another point that I want to make is when we look at 20,000 cases closed, a lot of those were in the last probably 6 months or so, where we went through and looked at the not sustained, unfounded, exonerated, and we said, okay, in order for us to kind of use our resources wisely and make sure we're focusing our energy and merit on the cases that look like they rise to serious misconduct, we've done an abbreviated review of those cases, which gave us the opportunity to kind of go through and close those cases that didn't look like they met one of the 9 definitions, right? It's something else. It's conduct unbecoming. It might be a policy violation on the agency. It is a form of dishonesty, but not the dishonesty that falls under SB2. And therefore, those cases are closed, which gives us the time and energy to focus on what we can consider the priority one cases. So to kind of paint the whole picture, it's a very, very small fraction of the 30,000 cases, less than 1%, are really amounting to something that looks like serious misconduct. But then you have to take into consideration how many surrender, how many default, how many investigations, make it through the process, which means there was something there, but our facts and evidence don't meet clear and convincing evidence. Doesn't mean there was no wrongdoing or there was no misconduct. It's just we're probably not going to be able to make that case in terms of what our threshold is. So all of that has to be taken into consideration. In comparison, today, what we know is peace officers have a much smaller percentage overall of cases that amount to serious misconduct today. I think we're probably going to need a good 5 to 7 years of data before we start making some really informed decisions about that, but it's a fair point.
And just so I appreciate that, just so I am clear in my mind, first off, what I'm hearing you say is that you're not concerned that there are thousands of cases out there involving peace officers where there's a substantial likelihood that they committed serious misconduct, and you haven't yet had a chance to triage them or evaluate them. Is that a fair assessment?
I think there's still some concern that our volume does not give us the ability to respond to them quickly enough. I think that they sit for longer than they should without an outcome.
I agree wholeheartedly with
Yeah.
you, which is why I think that there needs to be some attention, or maybe we need to revisit the issue of what really should be reported to Post. Because if we're going to report every single grievance, allegation, complaint, irritation that someone might have with a peace officer to Post, then we run the risk of the truly serious cases that warrant the investigation being swallowed up by all of the ones that don't. And I've made that point in the past, and I think we should continue to address that issue, because you want this to be an effective program. And I know that you and I have had some discussions about this, and I'm not please don't take me as lecturing you or lecturing the exact,
No, no.
yeah, that's not at all what I'm saying.
Yeah.
But I do think, and I do think it's important to take into account the ones who self-surrender, I think was, because that's an admission of guilt in and of itself, right? I still am seeing though, and I respect the fact that we need a few more years of data, but what I'm seeing here is that a relatively small number of peace officers overall are the ones who are involved in serious misconduct, meaning the vast majority of them are not. They're human and certainly they make mistakes, but we're not seeing that. And I'd love to see again where we can compare that to other professions, because SB2 was enacted because there was a perception on the part of the legislature, on the part of the community, that there were lots and lots of rogue cops out there. And I don't think the data is ultimately supporting that. And the quicker that we can make that, we can show that to the community, the quicker it is we can start rebuilding trust within our communities, the quicker it is we can start addressing the recruitment issues that we have, the quicker that we can start addressing the health and wellness issues that are prevalent within law enforcement because of the morale that's there. So it's an important thing to me. And again, I know you know this, but this was my opportunity to make that statement. So I'll step off my soapbox now. Thank you.
Emery, I do, just off the top of my head, I believe the number of voluntary surrenders hovers just over 100 since 2023. A handful, I would say less than 10, were surrendered with absolutely no encouragement, so to speak. We didn't send them a letter of investigation. It was not part of a plea deal. And then the rest of those are split between us sending a notification and part of a plea deal.
So I hear you're talking less than 500, and we're talking 82,000 cops, and there's less than 500 of those to that point. So I think that's worthy of taking up.
The final thing I'd like to mention, Chair Salazar, if you will, we've recently had a healthy discussion with the associations about some of the application of Senate Bill 2 implementation. Won't get into the specifics or the merit of that. I don't know if Chief Salazar is going to cover that, or excuse me, Chair Salazar is going to cover that. But one of the things that came up is like, where are the gaps, right? So I want to balance the conversation by saying, this is limited to the 9. And what we see a fair amount of that we don't act on, can't act on, not part of it, is neglect of duty. And that one becomes significant when we're looking at public harm because someone didn't do something and then there was a really unfortunate occurrence. Arguably, it doesn't take away from the fact that it's still a very small percentage overall of 82,000 peace officers. But there are a fair amount of cases where we see things that I don't think any of us would want to see from a law enforcement professional. That is something we can't act on. And so I think when we have these discussions broadly about, where is the public perception line, and really should we be accepting complaints, charges, and allegations that haven't been investigated yet and that don't have any merit, and we don't know if there's any there, and we're spending a lot of time looking at those. I just want to balance the discussion by saying there are areas of concern that Post does not have jurisdiction over that would balance the discussion about, what is the real public harm if there is any. Yeah.
Well, I will say, so there, we did have a good discussion, the associates, Cal Chiefs, Cal Sheriffs, PORAC, with a number of items of concern related to SB2, some of it related to the process and how that plays out, but some of it also related to definitions. And, it's a lot of cases that are being submitted to Post. And is there some work that we can do to either fine tune the definitions or some of the process so that it kind of reduces some of that load on Post, so that Post can focus on what the real problems are. And that's ultimately where our concerns are, ensuring due process is handled appropriately. But for SB2 to be effective, those definitions need to be, I think, honed in to some degree. So some cases aren't making its way to Post. But then I also agree with you. I think there are some that we've seen that don't fall in those 9 categories that should be actionable that have not been partly because of definitions. So I think it was a good discussion. Certainly some work to be done but the data helps. We appreciate that. Any other questions or comments on this item? Okay, thank you for that report. Okay, our next item is a report on expenditures year to date for fiscal year 24-25. This time I call upon Staff Service Manager Kim Singleton from the Administrative Services Bureau and Assistant Executive Director Tom Osborne from the Field Services Division, who provide a report on this item.
The first slide that you see, I'm going to go ahead and go over expenditure reports. This is the total budget for post. It's broken down total by fund. It looks like about 60, almost 60% of our budget's been spent so far up to May 12th, 2025. So post is funded by mainly two funds, the state penalty fund and general fund. The next slide, we'll look at the state penalty fund. That slide, it's just showing total expenditures up to May 12th, 2025. State penalty fund, that's 42% of our total budget. General fund is about 57% of our total budget. So far, up to May 12th, 2025, state penalty fund, we've spent about 58%. And then for general fund, 56%. Are there any questions so far? In the next slide, we'll show expenditures for the general fund. That's it for the expenditure reports. And then we have the contract expenditures report. So these are just the commission approved contracts. And there is, let me see. I believe there is, so there's one part within the table. If you look under supervisory course, the numbers are off. The commission approved total should be about 1.8 million. The reason why it's lower there is because it did not include two contracts that were executed. LAPD about 141,000, and then SAC Regional about 189,000. So apologies for that. And then we're on track as far as like spending for contracts. Let's see. This fiscal year's contract compared to last fiscal year's contract for the approved amount. Any question?
Brent Stocker, and just to confirm, the balance that runs through end of July?
So that's up to May 12th, 2025. There will be more activity up to June 30th, 2025. Historically, in the past, not just looking at contracts, but as the budget in total, we do spend about over 70% of our budget. For those contracts, they are encumbered this fiscal year, but we do have 3 fiscal year totals to expend. So the remaining balance will it'll change each fiscal year.
My question is on the last column there, we have the balance. So that runs, how long do they have to spend that?
Till the end of this fiscal year, June 30th.
Okay, thank you.
2025.
Hey, Mr. Chair, Manny Alvarez. Yeah, just to emphasize Kim's point, they have 3 years to bill us, even though the training has to have been delivered or whatever the services are by June 30th. They still have 3 years to bill us, and that does happen. That's why you see the numbers that balance there being fairly significant. Obviously, if you look at like the supervisory course, that obviously is being delivered and most of that money has not been billed to us, or we have not been invoiced for it yet.
Pacheco, just a question on Command College. Has that been scaled down in the last year or so, or were we having trouble getting applicants? The reason I heard, and we have some of our folks are looking into it. Has anyone heard anything?
Yeah, I can address that, Jim Grockow. We did postpone a class due to low enrollment. And so we are really making a push this year to ensure that our enrollment is up to meet the expenses that we're allocating for each presentation of our courses, especially our contract courses. So we made a business decision to essentially push it off for a number of months to try to fill the class more.
Thank you.
For me again too. So that postponement is till December. It was supposed to start in May. There should be a bulletin going out in August seeking applications for Command College. Those that are already in the pipeline that had applied for the May course do not need to reapply, but there should be a bulletin coming out in August, and hopefully the selections will be made in September.
Any additional questions or comments? Okay, we will move on to item 2H,
We
report.
still have one more slide to go through, Chair Salazar.
Tim Ford.
There we go. I've got the microphone in front of me, so I need compelled to talk. Good morning, Chair Salazar, advisory board members, Tom Osborne, Assistant Executive Director. I wanted to talk a little bit about the May revised and the impact that it has here on Post. So Post's overall budget from the May revised that you really can see well on that screen was reduced by 9.94%, or $11 million, $11,123,000. This includes a reduction of 6 positions, which is about a 2.28% reduction in staff, and then some operational savings as well that make up that 11 million. In March, and also with the advisory committee, I provided some details from the 24-25 Budget Act, which identified 2 distinct areas that we needed to address. Control section 4.12, which is related to vacant positions, and control section 4.05, which was related to ongoing savings from operations. I explained our internal process that we went through at that point in time to identify positions that were vacant that we could offer up potentially for reduction, as well as different savings in that regard. So what we see now from the May revised from the January 10 budget incorporates our recommended amounts of positions and salary savings. So from the salary savings side, it's $1,789,000, which represents 6 positions that were identified for proposed elimination as a result of May revised, and an operational savings of $9.3 million. So with all of that being said, there's going to be no impact to the field, no impact to the delivery of training, and no impact to the delivery or reimbursement to local training for local assistants. Happy to answer any questions if you have any.
Brent Stalker, I have a question. Could you blow that slide back up again, please? Scroll down. Is the general fund the only fund that can be carried over, if I'm reading that correctly? Meaning, can any of the contracts, if the money is not spent, can it be carried over to the next year?
I'll defer to the expert, but I do not believe so.
So the contracts, when they're encumbered this fiscal year, that's like us holding the total amount for the contracts. And then the next fiscal year, whatever we don't encumber it goes back to the general fund.
If I may, Mr. Chair and Vice Chair Stalker, I believe we can amend the contracts for up to a year, but the amendments have to be in place. Correct me if I'm wrong, Kim, with what I'm saying. By the end of June 30th, we can amend the contract and give it another year. We did that historically with the Museum of Tolerance when COVID, and they weren't able to operate the museum. We were able to extend their money really over the course of almost 2 years. But it does require an amendment, and there are some time deadlines. Generally, we don't like to do that. We like to just kind of close it out June 30th if at all possible.
Thank you.
Any additional questions or comments? Okay. Now we'll move on to 2H, report. Did you already do a report on contract expenditures? Is that included? All right, right on. We'll move on to number 2I, report on legislative update. At this time, I'll call upon Staff Services Manager Megan Polis, Public Affairs Unit in the Executive Office, who will provide a report on this item.
Good morning-ish. Once again, I stand between lunch. It's this pattern. It's very strange to me. Anyways, good morning. I'm here to give you an update on the 2025 legislative session. We're currently at the midpoint. Bills are either done and going on to the 2-year list, or they're moving over to the opposite house. Floor session is occurring as we speak. So today I'm just going to discuss a few bills that we are monitoring. It's not a complete list by any means. The first one is AB 31 by Assemblymember Ramos. This bill we saw last year as well. It would establish a pilot program under DOJ and Post, granting peace officer authority to certain tribal police officers on Indian lands. And the pilot period would be from July 1 of 26 to July 1 of 29. DOJ would be selecting 3 tribal entities based on minimum qualifications and standards that are outlined in the bill. AB 68, so this bill was originally introduced by Assemblymember Astaley, who has since moved on to a federal government role, is now authored by Assemblymember Gallagher. This bill would require a school district to contract with at least one armed school resource officer to be present at each school of the district during school hours or whenever pupils are present on campus. This bill did not make it out of committee, but it has a new author, and I'm sure it will likely become a 2-year bill at this point. AB 284 by Assemblymember Alanis. This bill attempted to change the makeup of the RIPA board to include additional representatives from law enforcement as well as the community. It failed to pass out of appropriations and is now a 2-year bill. AB 354 by Assemblymember Rodriguez. This bill would allow Post to access CLETS-derived information for the purposes of criminal history information, criminal offender record information, criminal justice information, and other information as prescribed for the purposes of carrying out its duties. And that bill is currently in the Senate. Assembly Bill 400 by Assemblymember Pacheco. This bill, I believe my colleague Mike Dallasay discussed earlier, it would require all law enforcement agencies with a police canine program to maintain a policy based on Post guidelines. AB 572 by Assemblymember Calra. This bill would require a peace officer or a prosecuting attorney prior to interviewing an immediate family member of a person who has been killed or seriously injured by a peace officer to clearly identify themselves, and if the interview takes place in person, to show identification, inform the person of specified information, including the status of their family member, and a laundry list of other things that must be included. And this bill would provide that its provisions do not apply if the immediate family member is under custodial interrogation. This bill we saw last year as well. It has changed several times, but is still being opposed by the law enforcement associations. And that is, I believe, in 3rd reading. So we'll see if that passes off the floor this week. Assembly Bill 992, this is by Assemblymember Irwin. This bill expands opportunities for peace officers to meet education requirements as previously outlined in AB 89. It fixes the error of and to an or, and also extends the timeline for achieving education requirements to January 1 of 2031. I'm sure we're all pretty familiar with this bill. And it does have a lot more content and it details in the bill. Tammy, it looks like you have a question.
No.
Okay. AB 1013, Assemblymember Garcia, this bill would require all peace officers with the rank of supervisor or below, or who is assigned to patrol duties or to supervise officers who are assigned to patrol duties to complete a course on behavioral health. That bill failed appropriations and is now a 2-year bill. AB 1388 by Assemblymember Bryan. I only have a few more, I promise. The bill exempts agreements between an employing agency and a peace officer that, among other things, require the agency to destroy, remove, or conceal a record of misconduct investigation. And that bill is currently on the floor. AB 1489, also by Assemblymember Bryan, this bill would have required agencies to have a policy prohibiting peace officers from carrying any firearm with a blood alcohol content of 0.00%. That failed appropriations and is now a 2-year bill. And the last one I have for you is Senate Bill 385 by Senator Sayarto. This bill repeals the requirement that posts adopt the recommendations as outlined in AB 89 from the Community College Chancellor's Office. And that bill, I believe, is on the floor, if not already in the Assembly. Those are the bills I have to report on for you today. The legislature has until the end of August to basically complete their process. As I said earlier, they're in or entering the opposite house at this point. And then the governor has until October 12th to sign or veto any bills. And I will just end with my extreme disappointment that the bill for the second year in a row to change daylight savings time is now a 2-year bill. It did not pass out of appropriations. So with that, I'm happy to take any questions.
Any questions or comments from Megan? Okay, seeing none, thank you for that report. Alrighty, it's 12:05. We are gonna break now for lunch and we will reconvene here at 12:35. Thank you. Okay, good afternoon. Welcome back. And we call this meeting back to order. We are going to move on to some additional presentations. We'll move on to the Basic Training Bureau. This first report will be from 3A, Report on Amendment to Commission Regulations 1005 and 1008, the basic course waiver process. Call upon Law Enforcement Consultant Michael Marshall and Associate Governmental Program Analyst Sarah Willow. I don't know, this is Willem. There wasn't a space there. I'm sorry. That's why I was messed up. Basic Training Bureau will provide a report on this item.
Good afternoon, Chair, advisory members. Today, I am presenting proposed changes to the Basic Course Waiver Program. Basic Course Waiver Program is also known as the BCW. The Basic Course Waiver Program receives roughly 150 applicants a year, including the Specialized Investigator Basic Course Waiver, also known as the SIBCW. Since January 2020, 272 Basic Course Waiver applicants have been issued their waiver. 187 gained qualifying employment. To date, 136 remain employed in California. Most of the requirements to apply for a Basic Course Waiver have been in place for over 25 years. To apply for a Basic Course Waiver, an individual must complete a 200-hour academy, have a total of 664 hours of general law enforcement training, and have a minimum of 1 year general law enforcement experience. To apply for an SIBCW, an individual must complete a basic investigative course similar in content to the SIBC and have a total of 591 hours of investigative or general law enforcement training and a minimum of 1 year investigative or general law enforcement experience. Regardless of the length of separation from law enforcement in another state, as long as the applicant meets the previously listed requirements, they can apply to begin the process with no other expectation for current employment. Currently, the process requires applicants to print and mail in their application. with their entire law enforcement portfolio, which in 2025 is a very outdated process. There have been instances where packages with applicants' personal identifying information have been opened and information removed prior to their delivery to Post. To address both the outdated minimum eligibility requirements and the outdated mail-in process, Post staff proposes changing to an electronic submission process system and propose an increase in the minimum eligibility requirements. For the electronic submission process, staff have already started and processed to develop an online submission page for applicants interested in applying for the basic course waiver or the specialized investigator basic course waiver. This new process will allow them to electronically submit the application, have access to instructional packets to assist in the process, and uploading all their supporting documentation. The proposed increase in minimum eligibility requirements include increasing the basic training requirement for the basic course waiver from a minimum 200-hour academy to a minimum 400-hour academy. Increasing the patrol experience requirement from 1 year to 2 years, which is in line with the time frame to obtain a post-basic certificate in California. Adding a new requirement that there will be no longer than a 6-year break in qualifying service to apply for the basic course waiver, and requires the applicant provide documentation supporting their last qualifying employment did not exceed 6 years prior to the date of application. Adding a new requirement, applicants attest they left their prior employment in good standing and they are not decertified and they are not in danger of being decertified as a peace officer in another state. The last proposed change to Commission Regulation 1005 corrects a conflict in regulation by removing allowance of one additional opportunity to complete the requalification course or test out option as step 3 of the basic course waiver process. Commission regulation allows 6 months for the applicant to complete the requalification course after receiving their approval letter from Post. Currently, if a basic course waiver applicant fails the requalification course, regulation allows them a second opportunity to retake the course within 1 year of the date of their failure, which conflicts with the 6-month time limit. Post is proposing to revert back to the previous regulation verbiage stating if an applicant fails the requalification course, the applicant would then be required to take a full regular basic course to gain employment in California as a peace officer. Thank you for your time. I'm here to answer any questions about the regulation change.
Okay, thank you for that report. Any questions or comments from the committee?
Yes, Brent Stalker. I think I heard you use the term patrol in there. So if they're coming from another state, confirming they are going to need some type of patrol experience in order for this to apply?
Yes, they need 1 year. Right now, it's 1 year of general law enforcement, which is including patrolling a geographical area.
And sounds like to me that what we're doing here is just upping the hours.
Correct.
Okay, that's great. Thank you.
Chairman, I have a question. In regards to the updating of the hours, you had made the proposal from 200 to 400.
Yes.
What's the intent and the purpose of that increase? And is it substantiated with the data?
So part of the increase is just to update the hours. Our process 20 years ago was 200-hour academy. 20 years ago, actually in 2000, there were 4 agencies below 400-hour academy. Raising the standard now, every academy in the state, in all the states are above 400 hours now currently. So it wouldn't be eliminating anybody in current times.
It's aligning with the nation.
Correct.
Okay.
Any additional questions or comments? Okay, thank you for that report. Okay, our next item will be a report on item 3B, report on amendment to training and testing specifications, adoption of learning domain 44 active shooter. This time I call upon law enforcement consultant Brandon Kiley Professional Conduct Northern Bureau, who will provide a report on this item.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon, everyone. Brandon Kiley, law enforcement consultant, here to provide an overall update of incorporating Learning Domain 44 active shooter into the basic course curriculum. As approved at the March 2024 Commission meeting, a Learning Domain 44 active shooter was piloted at several basic academies throughout the state. The pilot program training was completed in December of 2024. The following presenters participated in the pilot program training: the California Highway Patrol, Orange County Sheriff, Riverside County Sheriff, Sacramento County Sheriff, San Diego Regional Public Safety Training Institute, San Joaquin Delta College, and the Ventura County Criminal Justice Center. Post staff, as well as some of the subject matter experts that helped to develop the proposed training and testing specifications, were able to attend the majority of those presentations. So we received in-person feedback. We also submitted, we also received online feedback in the form of questionnaires that were pushed out to the instructors and the students. We received a total of 318 student questionnaires. With the information that was relayed to us through those questionnaires and the in-person feedback, we were able to provide that information at the most recent March 2025 Basic Course Consortium. That information was provided to the coordinators and directors in attendance through actually having several of the pilot program participants give a presentation of what worked successfully for them in delivering the required learning activities, equipment that they use to accomplish that, how they developed their lesson plans, et cetera. That was had the additional benefit to also, by giving that information to those directors and coordinators in attendance, to start planning, if this learning domain is to be incorporated, to have an ample time to make those preparations. The content for Learning Domain 44 Active Shooter is designed for students to use their critical thinking skills in order to determine when they may need to use rapid response-based tactics versus a slow systematic approach based upon the stimulus that is presented to them. The required learning activities are designed to reinforce this. So when we boil it all down to it, we want to develop in them the ability to read the landscape presented to them and react appropriately. This learning domain would ideally be introduced towards or at the end of a course presentation, the idea being that the students would have received all the other learning domains that are complementary to this, such as patrol techniques, crimes in progress, use of force, et cetera. So from an academy standpoint, in that environment, hopefully they're able to act or react or apply these at a peak performance level, again, for academy knowledge, but they would have all those learning domains to apply this to and have a stronger concept when applying those tactics of when to put their foot on the gas, take their foot off the gas regarding rapid response-based tactics. This proposed learning domain would be covered in the regular basic course for 16 hours, the module 1 for 16 hours, and the module 2 for 6 hours. And I'm happy to answer any questions if there are any.
Any questions, comments?
Brent Stalker, I had a question regarding tactics. So if we were to use as an example a school shooting, active shooter at a school, that's a call where I believe you have a high probability of several different agencies responding. And if I could use an example, let's just say that we have a school shooting in a jurisdiction. Sheriff's deputy shows up, a police officer shows up, and a CHP officer shows up. When I was trained, when this first came out on active shooters at a school, we used what's called a diamond formation. And I don't know if anybody's still familiar with that, but it was kind of a universal language that we all knew. So it really didn't matter where or who you're from. We just kind of got into the diamond formation and we did what we had to do. So my question is with this content, is there something similar to that, to where if multiple agencies show up on a school shooting, they are going to have some type of an idea of what to do tactically to move through an active shooter or at a school.
And thank you for that question. And that's always the challenge and the balance of how do we provide structure without too much structure and impeding, what a presenter feels they need to cover, and do it in a complementary fashion. So the subject matter experts had talked about this at length, and it had gone back to within each region where they're still going to be using the training and testing specifications as a roadmap. They have the flexibility if they have their own personal preference for a particular tactic, they have that ability to do so. But in watching the presentations, especially with an event like this, and if you are including other agencies, that the basics always work the best. So diamond formation, a wedge formation, those things were commonly, it was pretty much universal that we saw in the presentation.
Thank you. Again, Brent Stalker, I appreciate that. I know this is very difficult to put this on throughout the state. I really think about that again, with school shootings, that there's just such a high probability that we're going to get multiple agencies there. And I just would really like to see some type of uniformity in this, if possible, to where at least the cadets have an idea of, what tactically they should do when they arrive. So, but I do understand it's difficult to try to do that, but I know it seemed like we were somewhat successful. Again, I just used the diamond formation as an example. It seemed like we were pretty successful on that, at least in my general area, that when you brought that term up, people understood that, the officers understood that. And so I just didn't know if we were kind of trying to put the same type of concept in place on this one.
And it's in the language of, as far as tactical movements, we address solo officer movements, team movements, overwatch, bounding, etc. But specifically examples of such as a diamond formation, wedge formation, etc. So it's, again, going back to that, how do you provide structure to meet the needs of those respective areas that are putting on the presentation. And if I may, the title was specifically addressed as active shooter to make the students kind of sit up in their chairs, lock in and pay attention, which makes it very easy to do. But the curriculum is really designed to address any active assailant, that whether you have an event where there are mass casualties that can be caused.
Thank you.
If I could just dovetail on that particular comment, Sony. So I do like the fact that you're going to allow flexibility depending on where it's being taught and what the resources are within that particular region, and certainly familiar with the concept of forming up in a diamond and moving through there. But it assumes that you have 4 cops on scene relatively quickly, and that may not be the case in every jurisdiction. You may only get 1 or 2 cops showing up. And I think part of that has to be some instruction about how to adapt to the situation, given the resources you have and the time that it would take to get additional resources, recognizing that none of us want to see a situation like one that occurred in Uvalde, Texas, where they waited too long. We want people to recognize the threat and move to it with the resources they have available. And so if that's in there, I think that's a positive thing.
And thank you for that point. It is in there. So we address solo officer response and team response, and layering in that is, even though there's no legal requirement that requires a peace officer to take that immediate action, making it clear in the presentations, which was good to see universal across the board. And I think it's something that everyone has at the forefront, that at the same time, you sign up for this job for a reason, and you have a duty and obligation to safeguard the lives of others and stop the killing, stop the dying. So we do have solo officer response and multiple officer response. And bringing that subject and broaching that subject by, again, my simple caveman brain, but show up, get a read of the landscape, and then react accordingly. And that's not easy to do. And that's really the art form of this profession in general, is how do you develop that skill? This is kind of the first stage in that, to be complementary to bridging a gap until they may receive in-service-based training along these lines. But when it all comes down to it is having to use your critical thinking skills and make that determination. Hey, next unit is 15 minutes away. I don't have time to wait. I need to go and develop that and throughout the training at this stage.
Tammy Morrell, California Academy Directors Association. I thought the Basic Training Bureau did an excellent job in getting the subject matter experts together. These were concerns from me as a director of a public safety training center where we have a variety of sizes of agencies. And so my county and my region run from very small agencies to pretty large agencies. So the mix of the subject matter experts from, a large agency versus public safety training centers, I think they came out with a good compromise in the lesson plans and in the expanded course outlines. And I thought the subject matter experts addressed all of this, and they did a particularly good job of figuring out what the content needed to be, given the fact that it's a fairly short course as learning domains go. They crammed a lot of information, and the diamond pattern is alive and well everywhere.
Hey, glad to hear that.
Gamboa, Private Presenters. I got a quick question about active shooter response. So I heard the issues with SOAR, sole officer response, perhaps multiple officers response. Does this curriculum include multi-jurisdictional concepts?
So the required learning activities are designed where that can be layered in. Again, that might be some leeway where it's up to the individual presenters, but most of these presenters are having students come through their presentation that are from a variety of agencies. So that's kind of a natural process, depending on where it is, no different than some presenters may have more resources available to them than others, where they may have an entire scenario village available to them, and then you might have another presenter that has to make sure they schedule this well in advance so they can have a dedicated area available to them. But all of those things, through observing the presentations, seem to be consistently done from presenter to presenter.
Just my last comment. Thanks for taking on this project. This is not an easy task. There's so many moving parts and complexities to what these officers need when they get onto a dynamic scenario like that. We often at times know people or ourselves to respond to scenes like this, and you get on scene and you think you're prepared, but you're not. And until you're right, until you're directed to make a decision in the moment. So thanks for your efforts.
Thank you.
Lawrence Hawker again. I know this is something that we're probably going to get asked through CPTMA, and it may be piggybacking off a little bit what you're talking about. So is there any talk or consideration about our current active shooting courses? I'm not talking about the ones in the academy, but just something that maybe a private presenter would put on or an agency may put on. Is Post considering maybe putting those courses in modification to incorporate what the new LD 44 is teaching as far as active shooting? Does that make sense?
No, it does. And as of right now, there's no plan to do so. And this will, like anything else, as a new learning domain, it may require some ongoing assessment to make sure that consistency remains in place, and that all of the presenters are being complementary to what's designed in the training and testing specifications and abide by them. But I guess that's also somewhat getting in that realm of, do we want Post driving specific tactics, which is a fine line, a fine balance, versus, you take someone like myself, the expiration date on my milk carton has expired. So, it's always one of those things where the person current and in the field, or wanting that information from them and them to be at the forefront. But exactly one of the topics that, at what time do we turn off the spigot, so to speak, but that was one of the ongoing conversations as far as how do we make this complementary across the board, but at the same time, it's a basic academy. So we just went back to what is the absolute upfront information they need to know as far as a first responder on scene and taking action.
Thank you.
Jim Grockow, I think that's something we're going to have to watch, like Brandon said, and if we need to retool and service courses or kind of reevaluate them after we see how it works out in the academy, I think that's a valid point that we would need to do that. Right now, as Brandon says, we don't have that because it's just in the infancy stage of rolling it out.
Any more questions or comments? All right, thank you for that report.
Thank you.
We will now move on to item 3C, a report to amend Commission Regulation 1006, extension of time limit for course completion. Call upon law enforcement consultant Brad Newmeyer, Basic Training Bureau, who will provide a report on this item.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Commission Chair, and hello to the advisory committee. Post Basic Training Bureau staff identified a need to add inclusive language to Commission Regulation 1006 to allow basic course presenters to request an extension of time limit for course completion. Post staff evaluated the Commission Regulation 1006, it's in attachment A, and determined the current regulatory verbiage excludes many students and agencies from seeking and potentially obtaining a reasonable extension of time limit for course completion, as it only permits a department to seek an extension. Commission Regulation 1001 defines a department or participating department as basically an agency that is a post-participatory agency only. Currently, post-certified courses are typically presented by departments and colleges, and to a lesser extent, private presenters. This requirement not only excludes many agencies that are not in the post program from requesting an extension, it also excludes presenters who are not a department from requesting an extension on behalf of students not affiliated with the department or agency. Additionally, it does not allow the presenter to seek an extension of the time limit for course completion on behalf of the department. The department has to do it solely. By adding the course presenter to the regulation, it would allow the presenter who typically has a working relationship with the presenter's course approver at post and the sponsoring agency or department to make the request for an extension of time limit for course completion on behalf of an affiliated student or a non-affiliate student attending the course. Post staff believes these changes will properly allow course presenters to request extensions for all students attending post-certified courses regardless of their employment status. And we recommend that change the regulation to add the simple words of or course presenter after department to round out the ability for course extensions. Open to any questions you might have.
Questions or comments from the committee? Okay, seeing none.
That was easy.
Thank you for
Thank
that
you.
report. Good job. Okay, our next item will be item 3D, report on amendments to Commission Regulation 1055, requirement for course presentation. Call upon Bureau Chief Carrie Holler from the Basic Training Bureau to provide a report on this item.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Currently, Commission Regulation 1055 requires presenters to complete and submit a course roster after the completion of a course presentation. The completed course roster includes all the individuals who attended the course, whether they were successful or not. However, the regulation does not require the presenter to enter a reason why they failed the course. So at times, our Bureau has been asked for specific reasons why students are failing out of the basic courses, and we don't always have an answer because we don't have that information. So by adding this requirement, it would help us identify the reasons why when we're asked, and also identify any trends or potential issues with any of the existing curriculum. At this time, I'd take any questions.
Any questions, comments? Okay, seeing none. Thank you for that report. Okay, we'll move on to the training program services items. This will be a report on 4A, report on district attorney investigator transition course regulation, and call upon law enforcement consultant Andrew Mendonca, Training Program Services Bureau, for this report.
Mr. Chair, the matter before you is just to clean up some regulatory language with respect to district attorney investigator courses. So the way that it sits right now, Regulation 1005 requires district attorney investigators to go through specified training within 12 months. What specifies that training is actually contained in two places. There's a 45-page document called Training Specifications, which is incorporated by reference into 1005. And then Commission Procedure D14 specifies what has to be in the course, but it's very broad. It's learning objectives, testing, learning activities, things like that. And this is a matter that's actually come before the commission before. We've had a few bites at the apple. The training specifications that are currently incorporated by reference is an old document. It goes back to 2009. The course has been updated several times since then, and that document has never been updated. So what we're asking to do, I met with the District Attorney Investigators Association and the instructors in the course back in March. And what we've identified is it really makes sense to not use training and testing specifications for the DAI course any longer. That's kind of an anachronism from when it used to be much more of an academy course, and is actually just to specify minimum topics in Commission Procedure D14. So what we're asking to do is to repeal out the training and testing specifications, which is the attached document within 1005, and just replace it with minimum topics in Procedure D14.
Thank you. Questions, comments? Thank you for that report.
Thank you.
Okay, Management, Counseling and Projects Bureau, item 5A, report on establishing a definition of biased conduct pursuant to Assembly Bill 443 and Penal Code 13510.6. Call upon law enforcement consultant Raymond Nana Diego, the Managing Counseling and Projects Bureau, and Assistant Executive Director Anne Marie Del Manayo, Peace Officer Standards Accountability Division, to provide this report.
Good afternoon, committee members, and thank you, Mr. Chair. Assembly Bill 443 established Penal Code Section 13510.6 and requires the commission to create a definition of, quote, biased conduct. It states that beginning on January 1st, 2026, when investigating any bias-related complaints or incident that involves possible indications of officer bias, a law enforcement agency shall determine whether the conduct being investigated constitutes, quote, biased conduct using the definition developed by the commission, which is up on the screen as you see. Post staff convened a group of subject matter experts on March 18 to 2025 to provide insight and help meet the requirements of Penal Code 13510.6. The group included Jay Boyarsky from the Santa Clara District Attorney's Office and Assistant CEO Jonathan Raven, representing the California District Attorneys Association, Detective Ashley Oliver from the Sacramento County Sheriff's Office, and Constitutional Policing Advisor Mary Izzati from the Orange County Sheriff's Department, representing the California State Sheriff's Association, Lieutenant Carmelin Rivera from the San Diego Police Department, representing PORAC, the Peace Officers Research Association of California, Special Agent in Charge Lottie Bloxam from the DOJ, Sergeant Robert Raw from the San Mateo County Sheriff's Office, Captain Sean Frost from the San Francisco Police Department, retired Lieutenant Paul Henry from the Santa Rosa Police Department, and Administrative Justice Department Chair Cheryl Mackey from Chabot College. The representatives from the RIPA board included Marisol Leon from the DOJ, co-chair Andrea Guerrero, and public defender Soleil Diallo from Riverside County. The diverse group of subject matter experts met over the 3-day workshop to assist the commission in meeting the requirements of AB 443 and Penal Code 13510.6 through their collective insight. The subject matter experts had legal, academic, or law enforcement backgrounds and came from various regions around the state. The group provided a suggested definition for, quote, biased conduct to the commission and offered input in expanding guidance for background and internal affairs investigations by law enforcement agencies through their collaborative effort and diverse expertise. The suggested definition was included in this agenda item as Attachment A and is a collaborative product from the subject matter experts in the workshop, not an independent work product by post staff. The accompanying information in Attachment A is offered by the subject matter experts as suggestions and context to help the commission meet the requirements of the new penal code. The group discussed how bias operates not only through what people do, but also what they fail to do. Within the context of AB 443, They talked about some of the academic literature on bias and key examples like, quote, failure to intervene in use of force incidents that could make officers complicit in bias or unlawful actions. They also discussed neglecting to investigate certain complaints since failure to act on reports due to bias assumptions could reflect systemic bias through inaction. Traffic stops also came up since inaction within agencies can enable a culture of racial bias and lack of accountability. The subject matter experts agreed that including, quote, inaction in the definition is critical. The suggested definition by the subject matter experts in the workshops provided considerations to expand the statutory language in Penal Code 13510.6A by introducing or paraphrasing statutory language by using verbiage such as, quote, action or inaction, quote, whether on duty or off duty, but omitted some language that the statute mandates be included. For example, quote, encounters with the public, first responders, or employees of criminal justice agencies as defined in section 13101, and, quote, an officer need not admit bias or prejudiced intent for conduct to be determined to be biased conduct. The next slide, please. On the screen is the agency requirements of 13510.6, and we'll take the next slide as well. Two options to define bias conduct are provided in the screen. This is option A, which defines bias conduct using statutory language only. And if we go into the next slide, option B replicates option A, but with the added language from the suggested definition by the subject matter experts in the workshop found in the agenda attachment. Option B is not the identical definition suggested by the subject matter experts, as additional text was needed to comply with the statutory mandates. Option B was constructed as a suggested definition to meet the statute's requirements while including additional language recommended by the subject matter experts.
Okay, any questions or comments related to this item?
Pacheco, a question, I guess, and forgive the ignorance. I understand this is statutorily mandated and we have to work off definition, but implicit bias, was there conversations during the SMEs if as agencies, we need to determine if the bias existed? I'm just trying to figure out a scenario where we as an agency would determine that implicit bias existed in our staff's feeling or lack of training without anything overtly being done, like social media posts or any outward indicators that our staff have explicit bias. Could you walk me through that? What was there any talk on how we as an agency could possibly determine what someone's feeling when there are absolutely no factors based on their behavior that would prove us to go down that road?
That is a great question, sir. Thank you very much. The AB 443, it outlines that the commission needs to define the definition. It also provides that we have to provide some guidance on social media background for officer applicants, and then some guidance on when there's allegations of potential bias conduct. But it doesn't, to my understanding, doesn't outline specific steps what to take. But in regards to the background investigations and an IA investigations manual, we do provide some guidance on that, and the subject matter experts in the work group have background investigations experience as well as IA experience, and some of those recommendations and points are going to be included in an update to the background investigations manual and the IA guidelines that will be produced later this year. And then I think in the background investigations manual, there was already some pre-existing content on bias as well. So this is essentially kind of building off of what is already existing.
And I get the background portion, but I'm just, if we get the complaint that we need to determine, so background aside, a fresh complaint for the community, it's just, I'm trying to wrap my head on how we would even determine that it's implicit, I guess. I guess that would be up to the individual agencies based on the pending determination of definitions from the commission.
And that's correct. One of the things that we've talked about in our post-staff meetings is that this is different than the serious misconduct. This is more in terms of an umbrella term. So if, for example, if there's an allegation of biased conduct in the performance of the duty, does that relate to more of a training issue? Does it trigger more of like an IA issue, or does it rise to that level of needing a call to post? So it's more of that umbrella term, trying to capture other aspects.
Nothing to do with decertification process, but potentially a training issue on the department side of the house.
Right, not as like specific to that. Would be separate to that.
Okay, thank you.
Sure, Tony. So if you could go back to option A and option B, and if I understand correctly, option A keeps the definition more closely aligned with the statutory language. Is that correct?
That is correct, sir. So as opposed to having it bullet pointed, we just put it in together as one rather long paragraph. But it is essentially statutory language only.
Got it. And option B, then admittedly taking into account the recommendations of the committee that you put together, but it would expand it.
Yes, sir. That it includes so the definition that was provided or suggested by the committee or the workroom group in attachment A. I have it printed out here. Is any action or inaction by a peace officer, whether on duty or off duty, that is motivated by bias, whether implicit or explicit, towards a person's actual or perceived protected class or characteristics. So while it is in favor of some brevity, it does miss some of the points that are listed in the statutory language. Hence, combining the two helps to meet statutory requirements while also taking into account their suggestions as well.
So are you suggesting that if you went with option A and kept the definition more closely aligned to what was in the legislation, it wouldn't meet your obligation to provide a definition? Do you think you have to go with option B?
No, I don't think so.
Okay,
Because
okay.
Okay,
All right, very good.
I can
Okay.
keep talking.
You can, but that's not required at this point.
Thank you.
Okay.
I appreciate
good.
it.
Council shook his head no, so
That's
yeah, fair enough. So there's a couple of concerns that I have, and I worry that we get ourselves further into the problem that we already have with SB2, whereas it's been very, very broadly defined, and we start getting all kinds of complaints based on perceptions that people have, and now you're even further inundated with cases that you have to look into and sift through to find those situations that actually warrant the resources. And I also have some concerns about this notion of inaction based on bias. And one of the things that's rolling around in my head that I'm a little concerned about is, there is case law that outlines that, generally speaking, law enforcement doesn't owe a duty to act under certain circumstances. And if we establish that duty, it opens up a whole host of liability for law enforcement agencies and law enforcement officers. And I think we need to be cognizant of that legal doctrine and principle, and be careful that we don't enact through statutory language some duty and then have an evaluation as to whether or not the officer in question exercised his or her duty appropriately based on bias, which is, as has been pointed out already, might be hard to determine, right? Because you're trying to peer into the thoughts of a human being. And I wonder if the better approach is to accept a more narrow construction of the definition based on the statutory language in the beginning to really get a better understanding of how this is going to be applied going forward, as opposed to expanding the definition, encouraging a lot more complaints to come in. Whereas if we started off with what the statutory language was or something close to it, we could have a better way of navigating what this is going to look like. And then if you need to expand it going forward, you could.
If I may, William Darden, Chief Counsel, recognized that when the subject matter experts recommended both the addition of off-duty and inaction, that by combining those two into the regulation, you're getting into a circumstance where potentially there could be some event that happens to an officer that's off-duty, where the officer takes no action, and that is now pulled within the confines of the definition. And you can easily imagine a circumstance where you're at Christmas dinner and a family member says something which is, which is a biased comment. And would this potentially require that an agency had to consider that the officer might need to take action in that circumstance? So I certainly recognize that. Because of that, we came up with some possible language if the commission does want to consider option B, and that would be to add something recognizing exactly what you said, Sheriff, that generally there is no legal basis for an officer to take action with certain exceptions. And so one possibility might be if we went with B, the commission could add in something like this. For purposes of this regulation, inaction refers to a failure to act when, pursuant to law or in accordance with the policy of the employing agency, the peace officer is obligated to take action. So that would make it clear with that sort of an addition that a failure to act or inaction is only something that the agency should consider if there was a duty to act, as you've said, either in accordance with law or in accordance with policy. One thing I think that's important to keep in mind is that this legislation came about as a result of a report of the state auditor that came out a number of years ago, where the state auditor reviewed several agencies that had investigated bias-related complaints and just determined that there really wasn't a fulsome and sufficient investigation of bias, that somebody may have made a complaint that they were stopped because, for example, of race or some protected class, and the sergeant that was investigating it, hey, why'd you stop that person? Oh, they had a tail light out. Okay, that's good enough for me, and closed it out. So some of what I think the law was trying to take into account is to sensitize agencies to the fact that bias can be more complex than that. And getting to your point about how do you determine if it's implicit bias or explicit bias, I think the way the legislature said it is Post will come up with this definition, and when an agency is investigating a complaint that has a bias component, then you should look to our definition, and that definition would say, hey, you just need to recognize that bias can result from an explicit bias, I don't like people of this protected class, or from these implicit biases. So it's more sensitizing the agency to the fact that there may be more to an investigation. Any event, sorry, I probably went longer than you needed, but
No,
just if that's a concern, that additional language might help to mitigate that.
Well, I appreciate that. I do think that there needs to be some clarification and not create a duty statutorily that didn't necessarily resist because of the unintended and potentially harmful consequences of that. I also have some concerns about mandating action while an officer is off duty. That brings into a whole host of other issues that I don't think have been, fully vetted in this regard. Not to mention the fact that, generally speaking, I think officers would be discouraged from taking action on, especially law enforcement matters when they're off duty and they don't have the resources available to handle that correctly. I would be concerned about putting officers in a position where they feel like they can't, no matter what choice they make, they're going to be subject to these claims, and given the potential ambiguity, notwithstanding your diligent efforts to provide clarification, it puts them in an untenable position. So I guess restate my thought that perhaps the better way to go is keep this as close to what is the legislature enacted. Let's see where it goes from there. And if there's a need to clarify it going forward, then you certainly can. And that's, I guess, all I have to say about that.
Pacheco, just, I feel like I need to say this after hearing that explanation, and your explanation, sir, was clear. I've seen a shift in the last, I'd say, 10 years in training. I've been in the training realm in law enforcement for many years. I've seen our officers embrace the implicit bias training more than I ever have. I think as an agency, as a profession, we see that it exists. Just with the language, again, I know this is reactive, it's not a post problem, it's not a legislation problem. It always comes back to the agencies, right? If this is read from an agency and they determine implicit bias exists, I'm saying it's going to take the progress we've potentially made if we tell staff, we find you guilty of implicit bias because of whatever. So again, that's on the agency level. Just for the commission's thought, I would hate for that to be tagged to an officer's jacket when there's no proof of it, because an agency fears ramifications, whether they exist or not, from this language from the state. Again, I understand we're doing our best to comply, but to put in there that we determine that implicit bias is a thing when I would say it's almost impossible to determine, would make the training aspect a lot more difficult for our staff to buy into that it exists. And I think we're doing a better job with it. So potentially, if agencies get it wrong, I think would derail the training, and that would be unfortunate. So just to get it on the record.
Ponce, I have a question regarding this, the legislation. What's the ultimate goal? Is there a reporting requirement on this bias finding? What is the end game?
Well, that's exactly a lot of the conversations that we had in-house is AB 443 just requires the definition of bias conduct, but it doesn't really provide much more guidance than that. It's just we have to define, or commission has to define bias conduct.
So it doesn't, if I understand the question, it's not establishing this as a category of misconduct. It's not adding it to SB2 as a serious misconduct. The legislature simply said, if you, the agency, are investigating a complaint that has a component of bias, you need to look to this definition in determining whether or not bias existed. So again, I think what the legislature was trying to do was say, we want agencies to be more sensitive when they're investigating these bias-related complaints. And instead of just simply accepting, okay, I stopped the person because, they didn't signal within 100 feet of a turn, that you can look deeper than that there may be more to it in that. And they're trying to give, the legislature was trying to give agencies that are conducting these investigations a little bit more fulsome of a definition and a way to flesh out and determine whether or not bias existed. But you're right, other than the legislation saying agencies must use this definition if they're investigating a complaint of bias, there's no mandate beyond that as it exists. And from our perspective, with the interaction with SB2, an agency may get a bias complaint, it'll conduct its investigation, and maybe it'll determine that it didn't occur, or maybe it'll determine that it's just a policy violation, or maybe it will determine that actually the conduct was so serious that it rises to a level of serious misconduct, and then it will get reported to post. But this is just at that very front end when the complaint comes in, the bias complaint, and how is the agency going to be investigating it? And this just gives that definition a little bit more context for the agency when it's conducting the investigation.
I will also add that the other piece to it is the backgrounds and for officer applicants as well. It does explicitly state about social media and reviewing it from that lens. So it does provide some guidance for the background investigations for officers or for people who are looking to get into the profession, and we'll be providing some guidance in that from the subject matter experts and their input into the background investigations manual.
On the attachment to this report, says input from subject matter experts. It kind of goes into legal considerations, implicit, explicit bias, responses, or anti-bias training and interventions. this document here, is this just a summary of the discussion that led to the definition that they chose, or do these get incorporated as some sort of guideline at some point in another document?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. That's a great question. No, this was put together by the subject matter experts independently, just to provide some context to the commission, to help the commission with defining bias conduct. So this is not going to be a standalone document or anything like that. It's just purely their collective expertise independently from post staff given to the commission for just more background info.
And I think that kind of goes back to the just how it makes the definition, I guess, a little more difficult. Because even with the addition to like the option B language, that document at least provides a little bit of context to it versus, the standalone definition doesn't have that context. So I think that's one of the issues that I have with option B. And then to the sheriff's point too, in creating a sense of duty, you look at protected classes, and one of the big challenges that we're facing in law enforcement right now is a response to mental health calls and disengagement policies and those practices, which are being interpreted by some as inaction. Although they're driven by what duty do we have on certain types of calls, what responsibility does law enforcement have on certain types of calls. And so that's where I would agree with the sheriff to some degree. I have some concern as that gets interpreted as some sort of a biased inaction because it involves maybe a protected class. The disengagement is led more from legal reasons than anything, but not from a bias. But that's where I kind of agree with what the sheriff's saying there with some concerns. But any other questions or comments on this item? Is there any sense, it says we provide feedback to the commission tomorrow? Is there a particular option that either is more largely supported by this group or one that is definitely not supported by this group that could provide additional feedback to the commission?
Only I vote for A.
Oh, this is Cottrell. I just have a clarifying question. It looked like the action or inaction was listed in both option A and B. Is that correct?
No, ma'am. So if we, you want to go back to that initial slide, that would be the second to last slide on option A.
So the action and inaction is only listed in B.
That's correct. So because that was part of the added language from the subject matter experts, option A is statutory language only. So it's really just taking what's in Penal Code 13.510.6, turning it into a paragraph.
Well,
Merle Kata, I would like to chime in for A as well. I think that when we come to legislation, less is more. And I think we should stick with what we think the legislative intent was.
okay. Thank you for that report. Check in with our court reporter. Do you need a break or one more? Where did we leave? Okay. On to Peace Officer Standards Accountability Division. This will be item 6A, report on peace officer revocations based on felony convictions. A call on Bureau Chief Michelle Weiler from the Certification Bureau to provide a report.
Good afternoon. So this item is pretty straightforward. As you may or may not recall, the commission had previously voted to not have to hear these and vote on these items in the future when peace officers' certifications are being revoked as a result of a felony conviction identified in Government Code Section 1029. After January 1st, 2022, that is a mouthful, I know. However, based on the rulemaking process and the timelines of our meetings, this is going to be the final time this item will be brought before this body and the commission to review and vote on. These 6 individuals were convicted of felonies in this last time frame, again, between the commission's last vote to make the change and the Office of Administrative Law approving and filing with the Secretary of State the revisions to our regulation on this process. So we have 3 individuals from Antioch PD are on this list. Mr. Amiri, Mr. Harris, and Mr. Padilla. And then we have an individual from Riverside Sheriff's Department, an individual from the San Diego PD, and an individual from the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department. So this will be the last time the commission will have to vote on it. In the future, it will be presented at the first presentation when we do our statistics, just as an informational item for them, so they know how many and who we have revoked certifications on based on the government code. That's it.
Questions or comments on this item?
Brent Stalker, CPTMA. I have a question on Padilla. Am I reading that correctly, that that's a misdemeanor?
Yeah, Government Code Section 1029 identified very specific misdemeanors. They're primarily felony convictions, but there are some specified misdemeanors, and this would be one of them.
Thank you.
Any additional? Thank you for that report. And we'll move on to item 6B, report on proposed adoption of Commission Regulation 1216, disciplinary guidelines. You know what? Let me check back in because I just told you we'd do one more. This might be a long one. Okay, so I call upon Assistant Executive Director Amory Dominayo and Bureau Chief Michelle Weiler, Certification Bureau, to provide a report on this item.
As you guys are all aware, we have been working on establishing some disciplinary guidelines for upwards of over a year now. We think we have it in a place where we hopefully the commission will agree with us and approve these disciplinary guidelines to move forward. We've taken into considerations feedback from the commission in March. At the March Commission meeting, we've taken into account some concerns that the ACLU and a member of the community had brought forward to us in March as well. Made some additional revisions. Some of the items that I wanted to bring to everybody's attention is that the ACLU is concerned that the use of the word may in some of these serious misconduct allegations was too flexible and could potentially provide a loophole for potential disciplinary action. And so one of the things we considered was, do we italicize may to stress that it is a may, not a shall, that there are other factors to be taken into consideration? Do we strengthen the language? So we are going to be strengthening some of the language. It's not in the document that's in front of you, but after additional discussion after this item was agendized, we did have additional language that we wanted to add. So for physical abuse, as well as demonstrating bias, the last sentence, after the last sentence of the last paragraph under each of these, we're going to add, however, revocation is not incumbent upon a pattern of behavior. So their concern was that we used, that we may consider a pattern of behavior, and then that could create that loophole. Well, what if there isn't a pattern of behavior? Does that mean they're subject to lesser penalty, which is certainly not the case. We don't need to have a pattern of behavior to revoke someone's certification, but we did take their concern into consideration and consider it a valid point that the public may consider this, as well as the potential administrative law judge may look at these things differently than we intend them to mean. So we strengthen that language. And then there was one other concern that they had where we strengthened language, and that was under law enforcement gangs. And there was some concern about a passive role in their participation in a gang. What if they were coerced? Does that mean that they would not also be subject to revocation? And again, we would look at the totality of those circumstances. So we strengthen that language as well by including, however, organizational pressure or coercion does not preclude revocation. So then again, that is strengthening the language to close that gap of any interpretation that we may consider something less if there is evidence of that coercion. The ACLU is concerned that potentially someone could claim they were coerced into participation in the gang, but we would also look at the totality of the circumstances. What evidence is there that they can provide that they were coerced into this rather than just willfully participating? There were also concerns, particularly about the board and commission's role and what, as far as the votes needed and their role in that, what information would be considered. So we strengthened that language in the preface. And then the biggest point of contention, I think, was in our optional terms and conditions as they related to potential psychotherapy or counseling treatments. Who is making that determination? How is that being determined? Are we putting the commission and post staff in a position to make that determination without professional experience? And that's certainly not what we were intending. So we, again, clarified that. We did meet with Dr. Sherilyn Lee from Santa Barbara County Sheriff's Office. She's our subject matter expert on this. We did also take into consideration other recommendations for other providers that are online. And we refocused, I should say, on cultural competency, the need to have culturally competent therapists that are, or practitioners that are doing these evaluations. So post's role would be to, or the commission's role would be to include, if it was deemed necessary, again, we would reach out to Dr. Lee or perhaps other subject matter experts to confer, but if the commission were to deem it necessary or potentially necessary, we would include in the terms and conditions that they would be required to at least undergo an evaluation. And then at that point, it would be up to the practitioner to determine whether or not this individual required further treatments, how long those treatments might be required, whether that needs to be continued at each of their evaluation points, because they would be required to provide quarterly reports to us. So then it's not in post's hands to make that determination. We're leaving it up to subject matter experts, true subject matter experts. And there was also discussion on, well, how do we determine who these individuals should be? Do we use the list of providers that are available for background investigations? A lot of discussion back and forth with commissioners, with Dr. Lee, amongst post staff, and there was concern that that was not a practical list to use because they may not be culturally competent in the needs of the peace officers. They may be general practitioners of psychology, but not specifically trained to deal with the needs of the law enforcement community. So Dr. Lee has agreed to help us in establishing that initial resource list, so to speak, of practitioners that peace officers may go to for these evaluations if they are not already working with someone. In some cases, they may already be working with a practitioner. In that case, we would ask the officer to provide the information for that practitioner. And again, Dr. Lee would assist us in reviewing their credentials and determining whether there is cultural competence to perform these evaluations and continued treatments for those individual officers. On the larger end, we plan to expand this just for informational purposes, because I know the commission had a lot of questions about this. We do plan to expand this as not just limiting this resource list to officers subject to certification actions, right? We would put this on our website, make it readily available to all peace officers. Actually, I should say all public safety personnel, to include dispatchers, chaplains, volunteers, anybody who may have been subject to something traumatic while working in the law enforcement environment who would need potential treatment or counseling. Open that up so that everybody in California would have access to that. It's not just exclusive to individuals who may be in disciplinary trouble with their certification. But that's kind of a long-term plan. And Dr. Lee, we've invited her to do a presentation at our September commission. in terms of how we plan to work this out in the future and hopefully near and long-term future. Oh, I also wanted to highlight that there was concerns about fitness for duty evaluations and whether or not that's stepping on the toes of the subject officer's potential employing agency if they're still employed. And the focus here is, well, what if the officer is no longer employed, but seeking to return to work? Who's responsible for that fitness for duty evaluation? If they're not employed, there's no agency head or anybody at that agency to direct them to that. Again, post would not be making that determination. It would be at the determination of a culturally competent practitioner in the field. I threw a lot at you, so what questions do you have for me? I know they're out there.
Manny?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Manny Alvarez. This is just a question for Anne Marie, if you can address this just briefly, Anne Marie. For some of us that aren't, or some of us that are not steeped as much in the disciplinary guidelines, what is the purpose of these disciplinary guidelines? Just in a quick thumbnail statement. And then two, the question that we get is post becoming a probation department for peace officers. Can you address both of those, the reason for it and how they would be used?
Thanks, Mamie. So primarily they're used by administrative law judges. So when they're writing their proposed decision that's based on the factual basis or the evidence and looking at legal conclusions that they would summarize for the commission as a proposed decision, they typically look to an agency's disciplinary guidelines to look at the acts or actions and then what is the appropriate disciplinary rendering, if you will, given those acts or actions. So administrative law judges typically will have a proposed decision that includes a penalty. In fact, I think we've confirmed with them that they typically will not write proposed decisions without including some form of penalty as part of the outcome of a hearing. So it's incumbent upon the agency to provide guidelines to the judges in terms of what the profession deems, not agency, us as post, what the profession deems as appropriate discipline based on whatever that deviation of expected practice was. There's actually in the APA, and I wrote it down, not that you care, but there is a provision in the APA that requires, it's 11425.50, and it basically says that if you're going to use some sort of disciplinary matrix, then you have to adopt it by regulation. You can't just have a policy that has a disciplinary matrix. It has to be something that you've actually adopted by regulation and is something that then the administrative law judges can use. It helps with consistency for the commission and looking at similar fact patterns or case factors in terms of being, I would say equitable in how they're imposing discipline. The only other point I would make to that, Manny, is that they're meant to be a living document. So in my experience looking and working with disciplinary guidelines, they evolve. They don't ever say stagnant because there's always things you don't consider, right? Case factors come up, specific areas perhaps of practice or conduct or what have you. The courts may do things that render your guidelines a little impractical. And then you have to essentially be willing to kind of evolve and change. So they are essentially that. They're guidelines adopted by regulation, and they're meant to evolve over time. One of the main factors between looking at fitness for duty professionals or experts versus therapeutic treating psychotherapists is that it's a screening versus ongoing therapy, and they're very different. A one-time screening is based on, as you folks know, a matrix of things that they're looking for certain answers or responses or certain language being used throughout that screening, which is very different than if you've got someone who has some sort of mental health need that is undergoing ongoing therapeutic intervention by a qualified professional. So that's why those two things are separated. And working with our professional expert, that was also very clear that someone who conducts screenings may not be the best therapeutic intervention for an officer that's going through something like substance abuse or they've got DV cases or other things that they need ongoing therapy for.
Okay, any questions or comments? Sure.
Yes, sorry.
Thank you.
Tony. Thank you for that clarification, because that will shortcut a little bit about what I want to inquire about. So turning to the area where an officer finds him or herself in a situation where there's discipline is on the table, and because of the facts of the particular case, you would, through these regulations, allow the administrative law judge to mandate an examination by a mental health clinician and perhaps treatment as part of that process. Is that, do I, no, that's not.
No,
No.
a judge can only make a recommendation to the commission.
Okay, I'm sorry, I apologize.
Yeah.
Make the recommendation to the commission. The commission would then say, okay, yeah, we're going to follow the recommendation. Okay, thank you for the clarification. I appreciate that. And so I fully agree with and appreciate the idea that if the mental health clinician is treating an officer, they should be culturally competent. Understand that. And I also understand the argument being made as to the differences between someone who's evaluating the fitness to be a peace officer initially versus ongoing issues. But do I understand correctly that it's a two-step process insofar as the officer would be evaluated by the mental health clinician who's culturally competent to determine whether or not ongoing treatment would be of value in this particular case? Is that correct? Okay. And is the mental health professional or the clinician doing the initial evaluation also able to do the ongoing treatment and counseling?
Potentially, yes.
So I'd be really interested to hear more about that, and perhaps next time when the subject matter expert comes, Dr. Lee, I think, I don't know about my colleagues, but I'd certainly like to hear a presentation. I have some concern about a scenario where the clinician says, oh yeah, you need ongoing treatment, and I'll go ahead and provide it to you. And I wonder if I'd like to hear more about the efficacy of that approach and whether or not you should have somebody doing the evaluation and someone else doing the treatment. So,
Sure, if you could have an instance where they're doing the ongoing therapy, the intervention without doing a fitness for duty evaluation. So for
which would be two separate processes. Yeah, because that's dependent on the department. The department's determining whether or not you're fit for duty, which would go back to perhaps the original standard, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Unless, let's
Okay.
say we have someone on probation for a period of time and they are now about to complete probation, and as part of their optional terms and conditions, the commission has ordered a fitness for duty upon return. That can happen simultaneously with an employment agency, or it can happen independent of that if it's part of the optional terms and conditions. So I want to make sure that's clear. I also want to touch on something that Director Alvarez talked about is, are we turning into a probation department? Well, we've put ourselves in a probationary role where there are some instances where substance abuse is the most common, where they're engaging in ongoing testing to ensure sobriety. And in that regard, there's some monitoring that happens by post. To the extent that any of the terms and conditions that we're offering today as appropriate as a first step, I don't think any of these are complex probationary monitoring type role for post to be in. It could evolve into that. I don't think anyone really had that in mind when we went down this avenue, but as you folks are all aware, working in agencies and imposing discipline is only good as you're correcting the action so it doesn't repeat itself. So if you're just doing something that's punitive and you're suspending an officer for a period of time, if there's nothing other than, time on the beach, have you corrected any of the behavior that led to the incident? So from a public protection role, if the agency's terminated them and the commission says, okay, we think there's a chance this person could redeem themselves, come back to the profession and serve safely and efficaciously, then what is the commission's role in making sure that whatever that was that led to the discipline has been remediated, has been addressed? And that's the point of probation. Probation is just, are there some remediation courses in terms of use of force, de-escalation, ongoing therapy? Are there things we need to address to make the officer whole so they can return to work? The goal with probation is to get them back to work. That's the goal. So instead of this scenario that was kind of put forward at the very beginning of Senate Bill 2, which is revocation and never reinstatement. So it's one and done. You don't have an opportunity to come back and state your case before the state, or some form of suspension. But what was that suspension intended to do? This is to try to shore up the suspension.
I appreciate that. Fully supportive of a pathway to redemption where that's warranted. And I think that this is what you're ultimately trying to get to. And it's not inconsistent with other professions.
Correct.
California State Bar Association has pathways to redemption. I'm sure the Medical Association does as well. But this is an area of complexity because I can foresee one, there not being a lot of culturally competent providers. There's a shortage of mental health clinicians to begin with. And now when the mandate is that they're culturally competent, I think that that's going to be a challenge to find them. That doesn't mean we shouldn't try, but there's going to be a challenge. Secondly, you've also highlighted the intersection of potential problems because you could have a person who is on probation with post hoping to get their certification reinstated. They could be dealing with their employer and they could be dealing with a workers' comp case as well, because it's not uncommon for people who are alleged accused of misconduct to and under investigation to go out on workers' comp cases. And so I can see where you have mental health clinicians who are evaluating this individual on multiple levels, and somehow you're gonna have to reconcile that. I'm not suggesting that you shouldn't try, but there's a lot of moving parts to this particular one.
And I think, sir, when you mentioned that there may not be a significant number of or enough culturally competent practitioners, that's where we could also run into that situation where the person conducting the evaluation may also end up being the person who's providing the therapies, depending on where the subject peace officer is geographically. Obviously, if you're in the Bay Area or the greater Los Angeles, San Diego area, you probably have more available practitioners than, say, in your region, where they're probably more scarce. And so in those instances, I can see where you may have that intersection where you don't have an option to seek a different practitioner for the ongoing treatments if necessary. But in speaking with Dr. Lee, I think our general plan now in terms of how we create this initial resource list and how we could potentially expand this resource list, we are looking to find practitioners throughout the state to make available to all of our peace officers or all of our public safety personnel, so that they're not all focused in Southern California or they're not all focused in the Sacramento area or the Bay Area. We want to spread that wealth throughout the state as much as possible.
And assuming you wouldn't prohibit telemed options as well. I mean, so if somebody's in Northern California, but they can't find somebody there, they could treat with somebody outside the area through telemed like we do on a lot of circumstances.
My experience is, they allow telemedicine as one of the avenues by which the method for delivery,
Additional questions or comments on this?
Lance, I have a question. So if you have a officer who's been suspended and they're deemed to need clinical help, who pays for that?
Actually borne by the officer.
Okay, so
Yeah.
they're paying
And
for
that's
it.
in the disciplinary guidelines.
Gotcha.
Ms. Weiler touched on something, Chief Weiler touched on something that I think is part of this ongoing work towards, do we just react to this and use it kind of as a means by which to establish consistency when we have misconduct? Or do we look at this from a preventative perspective and then incorporate some of this with our wellness side of the house that you heard from earlier? And what would that look like? Where they, it's kind of like diversion, right? They can self-refer into some sort of treatment program. They can, voluntarily kind of submit to this. There'd be some confidentiality behind that. And then perhaps looking at, just things we're kind of exploring or options. Would there be grants for individuals who either insurance didn't pay for or whatever that treatment was, but perhaps maybe the associations donate to some sort of grant fund that is managed by Post, but there's a program by which they can self-refer. And whether that becomes diversion from discipline, which is a whole different ball of wax, or just an opportunity for them to get healthy before they end up on this side.
That's our long-term grand plan.
Ms. Docker, CPT, may I have a quick question? Sorry. You may have already answered this. I was trying to listen in. How much of the information, let's just say that an employee goes to a clinician, how much of that information gets reported back to the department, or what would that requirement be?
So it would be kept at a minimum, right? We want to maintain the peace officer's confidentiality. So at face value be what the practitioner would then be expected to report back to us. In terms of POSAD, is that this person is seeking ongoing treatment. And basically that's it. We're just asking for a confirmation that they are seeking or participating in the ongoing treatment that they've been asked or mandated to attend, and that this therapist is providing that to them. We don't want the juicy details. We don't need those. We just want to know that this person is getting the help that a practitioner deems necessary for them.
Yeah, appreciate that. Because my concern is always is if an employee is concerned about what is going to be reported back to the department, they're going to clam up. Because if it's their job that's on the line, I just have through experience have known that, and that word gets around. And so I would hope that this process would be, or just give the employee the ability to freely talk about their issues without the concern of causing more problems with their employment.
Yeah, and just so we have this written into two different sections. Item 18 is the counseling psychotherapy, and item 19 is the fitness for duty piece, where we do specify that the practitioner is to, no time shall the practitioner send protected health information to the commission without the written consent of the respondent. Should the practitioner believe the respondent is not making progress in therapy and believes the respondent poses potential harm to the public, they will recommend to the commission the respondent be sent for a fitness for duty evaluation. And then under the fitness for duty piece, same thing, the quarterly status reports shall report whether the respondent is attending and participating in treatment. That's all we're asking for. We don't want anything else.
Last question. Would that clinician then be the deciding factor as to whether or not that person would be, I hope I'm saying this right, able to go back to work?
I think it would depend on the circumstances for that individual peace officer, how dire their situation may be in terms of the treatment necessary, whether or not they're making progress, whether or not that practitioner feels comfortable making that sole decision, or maybe, as Sheriff Honey suggested, another practitioner maybe make that recommendation after evaluating records. But again, that peace officer would have to be willing to open up their records for inspection by another potential practitioner, or sit through an independent evaluation with that practitioner.
I appreciate that. I just, again, my concern is that that could be a human resources nightmare if, they're trying to get, they're trying to get an employee back, and clinician is just not willing to release that. And again, that's probably in rare circumstances, but that may be problematic.
Well, and I'm not a professional, so, but I don't think it would be out of the question that if that person felt that was happening, that they could seek a recommendation from somebody else, right? It's just like when you get a medical diagnosis, you seek a second opinion.
Yeah, it'd be very similar to, your initial psychology exam when you get hired. So if you don't pass that, then you have the ability to, seek another opinion. So great. Thank you.
Have a grin on your face. I appreciate you. You keep us on our toes.
I appreciate that.
Aside from the public comment received by ACLU, was there any other comments or correspondence received on this item at all?
There was a member of the public who also spoke in March. Her concerns were similar to that of the ACLU.
Any other questions or comments? Okay, thank you for that report. All right, we are going to take a break now, 15 minutes. So we will reconvene at 2:20. All right, welcome back, and we're going to move on to a couple more presentations here. Next up, we have item number 7. It's a report on proposed amendment to Commission Regulation 1201, definitions related to peace officer certification. I'll call upon Staff Services Manager Lindsay Llewellyn from the Certification Bureau and Bureau Chief Michelle Weiler from Certification Bureau to provide a report on this item.
Hello, this is my first time up here. I'm Lindsay Llewellyn. I'm Staff Services Manager in the Certification Bureau. And we're just here to present really quickly some updates to 1201. This was first presented last June to Commission, but the Office of Administrative Law suggested that we submit it along with the disciplinary guidelines so the definitions will match, and that's what you just heard. So essentially, we're just adding some terms and amending a couple terms in 1201. Terms being added are accusation, canceled appointment, canceled certificate, conditional certificate, default revocation, denied appointment, denied certificate application, expired, stipulated settlement, and corporal. Corporal was inadvertently left off when 1001 was referred to create 1201. And additionally, we did find a typo in the corporal definition since last June. We're replacing R with an is. So the text has been added to now read, corporal is a quasi-supervisory classification as defined in Commission Regulation 1001 and is not eligible for the supervisory certificate. 2 terms are being amended. That is first level supervisor and middle management position. What questions do you have?
Questions, comments from the committee? Seeing none. Thank you for that report.
Thank you.
Move on to Legal Affairs Bureau. Item 8, a report on discussion and possible action to amend Conflict of Interest Code pursuant to Government Code Section 87306. Call upon Attorney Bryant Henley from the Legal Affairs Bureau to provide this report.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and committee members. Good afternoon. So for those of you who have been involved in state or local government, certainly employed in state or local government, you're likely familiar with California's Political Reform Act. That's a set of laws like all states have involving behaviors within state government and contacts you may have with external sources that might come before state government. And it's a set of laws that regulate how and when employees who work in state or local government, how they should conduct themselves with regard to interests they may have outside of their positions. This matter that's before you today and will be before the commission tomorrow relates to a provision called the Conflict of Interest Code that every agency has. The Conflict of Interest Code relates to what those of us in state and local government know as the Form 700, which is a financial interest disclosure form. That form is a form which some, but not all, employees in government must disclose any interest they have that may relate to the work they do in state or local government. Here we have in post, we've had a conflict of interest disclosure process, a conflict of interest code that's been amended a number of times. The last time it was amended was in 2018. Because of changes in law since 2018, and in particular, Senate Bill 2, which created a whole host of new responsibilities and duties for post, we've gone into a process to amend our conflict of interest code to identify for certain state employees the extent to which they should look for and identify themselves as persons who should be reporting financial disclosure obligations. And we have gone to the Fair Political Practices Commission, the FPPC, with proposed amendments to our conflict of interest code that relate mostly to what we do with regard to Senate Bill 2. The FPPC has reviewed our proposed amendments to the conflict of interest code. They've given us some guidance on suggestions they have, which we've incorporated. And those amendments are the amendments that will be presented to you today, and then again to the commission tomorrow to vote as to whether to proceed to adopt those amendments or not. So that's kind of a high level discussion about this particular topic. I'll pause in case there are questions or comments regarding the proposed conflict of interest code amendments that we are proposing.
Questions or comments from the committee? Okay, seeing none. Thank you for that report. Okay, that concludes the presentations today. Before we move on, are there any other questions or comments before we move on? Or any comments that should be provided to the commission regarding the agenda tomorrow? If not, we will move on to our advisory committee member reports. This is the time for advisory committee members to report on any items from their respective organizations. We'll start next to me here with our vice chair, Lieutenant Stalker.
Yes, thank you. Brent Stalker, representing CPTMA. I'm going to try to make this quick as possible. CPTMA felt it was important to conduct some training needs assessment workshops. Our goal is to get an idea of what training departments need or new training that they were desiring. CPTMA held 2 training needs assessment workshops, one in the north, which was held at Stanislaus County, and one central, which was held in Fresno County. The results of each workshop were documented with the following topics: departments attending, courses taught in-house, percentage of courses departments sent officers out to attend, number of in-house instructors, and overview basic talking points that students presented during these workshops. Attendees developed several courses that they felt were needed in their specific region. CPTMA noted the courses the attendees felt were the most important. I'd like to start with the North chapter. Their most important was use of force instructor, background investigator course and updates, PSP courses, 1070 update and retraining, high-tech courses, and instructor courses, supervisory, leadership, and emotional intelligence. In the central area, the most important courses that they identified were drone training, additional FTO courses, additional regional supervisor courses, case law updates, additional PC 832 courses, and use of force instructor, specifically local courses. General information that CPTM noted for the workshops: most departments rely on regional training centers and large sheriff's offices for training, which is, we all realize that if you're a smaller agency, you're going to be looking for that. Money is fronted by the department first, and then they get reimbursed by post. Some of the comments that we received is some of the smaller agencies, this can be problematic depending on their limited budget. One of the things that they brought up, and I know this is very difficult, is if it's possible to ever get that money fronted to the department for training versus reimbursement. A good majority of the workshop attendees were from small agencies who showed the most concern for training needs. Big agencies with the money have more flexibility, obviously, for training. CPTMA had instructors. At the workshop, we had instructors, we had FTOs, we had dispatchers, and wide variety of people. And I think what was most important to us is we're really getting what we believe is the unfiltered training needs of our local departments. And just as a reminder, CAPTO, which is the old CPTMA, was really trying to help the smaller agencies, with training needs and figuring out ways to kind of overcome some of their hurdles, just based on the fact that they're smaller agencies. And just to carry that on, CPTMA is still very interested in helping the small agencies find the training that they need in their areas. And just the last thing is, we found out that we had a small agency in our in Central that basically they get all of their information through a PO box. And so because of that, I think the problem that we found was that a lot of the training flyers were getting sent to the physical department because that's what people see online. And we believe that because of that, they were missing a lot of information. So that was just something that CPTMA realized, and we're hoping to work with any of the agencies that do get their, correspondence through a PO box. So overall, the two training needs assessments at both North and Central, we got a lot of great information out of it, and really learned a lot. And again, CPTMA is going to work hard on trying to come up with solutions for both the North and Central chapter. Thank you.
Thank you for that report. We'll move on to Ms. Cottrell.
Thank you. Just a brief recognition for the hard work being done by Bureau Chief Holler and two of our team members, Michelle Dobner and Jamila Fields. They've made themselves available, accessible, and present to the Public Safety Dispatch Work Group to re-examine past practice and to improve outcomes for the field. And we're grateful for their efforts.
Herman.
Just one of my most recent PORAC meetings, some of the concerns expressed are just there's concern over the manner in which the cases are brought to the committee, the SB2 cases. If I guess the speed in which they're brought to the committee, people are concerned about the amount of time it takes. If you just look at the raw numbers, it looks like, in a sense, they'll never get through what's sitting on hand right now. And a lot of it is misinformation or not really taking time to look at it. But from the outside kind of looking in, some of the concerns are with the amount of reports and the different referrals, you'll see that you're looking at 100 years before your case gets through to the hearings. So that was the most common thing I'm hearing. They're just concerned about the speed in which it appears the cases are coming forward for hearings.
Mr. Gumbo.
Well, just a couple of things. One, nothing from the private presenters pool of people, but just like Cottrell, it's just a brief recognition primarily for Stephen Crawford, the consultant in charge of the FTO program for the state of California, and also Sarah William. They have done a tremendous job in trying to revamp the FTO program in California. I sat on several work groups up and down the state, including to redeveloping parts of the FTO manual, redoing the curriculum, and also part of some video projects for River City PD. My experience with that is it increased my level of performance as an FTO manager. It's provided a lot of clarity for me to be a better mentor and coach for other FTOs in California. And through Savage Training Group, we're able to reach that number and pool of people just because a lot of them come to our classes throughout the state. So I just want to recognize those two. And everybody else has done presentations today. Just did an enormous job in making sure that the committee is informed. And the last thing is just a statement where I didn't get a chance to really introduce myself, and I just showed up in San Diego. I'm really privileged and honored to be a part of this committee. I'm privileged to work alongside all these distinguished leaders and law enforcement, labor advocates, and higher education. I got over 30 years experience, and I served in roles from frontline patrol to training, policy development, oversight, and I remain committed to advancing the highest standards of professional development for California peace officers. The last part of it is a quote from John Dewey: "Education is not a preparation of life. Education is life itself." That belief fuels my passion for innovation and evidence-based training. It ensures that our officers are prepared to meet the complex demands of modern policing with skill, confidence, and integrity. We have a unique opportunity in this committee to shape the future of law enforcement in California. We can enhance the officer's safety, elevate training standards, and strengthen the values of professionalism, adaptability, and accountability. I look forward to working with all of you, and certainly learning from you every time I come up here. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you for those comments. Sheriff?
Yes, thank you. So California State Sheriff Association, of course, we're still very anxiously awaiting a resolution to the modern policing degree problem that exists. So I know that we're watching that. And another area of concern, I think it impacts all law enforcement, sheriffs, police, patrol, dispatch, corrections, is the rapidly evolving and somewhat confusing area of immigration enforcement and ICE within our communities. You may or may not be aware that the Department of Homeland Security sent out a letter last Friday naming a whole host of counties, although not all counties in California, and a host of cities that they deemed as sanctuary jurisdictions. There's no rhyme or reason as to what made them conclude that those jurisdictions were on that list, but then asserted that they were violating federal law. Within a day or two, that was removed from their website. So without any notice. So we're not entirely sure why the letter was issued or why it was taken down. In addition to that, I spoke last time about the fact that ICE began entering administrative warrants into NCIC, which under California state law, law enforcement officers, California law officers are precluded by law from making arrests on these administrative warrants. But more recently, we've learned that they've started to enter actual warrants issued by federal magistrates into NCIC. And I bring that up because I wonder if Post at some point might entertain the idea of putting together some training for patrol, dispatch, and corrections, helping them discern between administrative warrants and actual warrants issued by magistrates and what to do with regard to that, and maybe some clarification around what they can do under SB 54. I think the next few years we'll see continued ambiguity or conflict existing between state and federal authorities. And I'd like to give all of the folks who may find themselves in a position to have to interpret what they're seeing, a clear understanding with that. The last piece of that is California State Sheriff Association will be hosting our annual conference next week in Placer County. And so I know that my colleagues will be looking forward to presentations from Post and hearing about all the good work that's being done by Post and as well as the commission. So thank you.
Thanks, sir.
Thank you, Cami Morrell, Kata. I just wanted to tag on what Sheriff Honey said. We at my college had some training from our legal staff, our legal consultants regarding ICE and warrants. I was pretty shocked at how simple it is for an agent to get an administrative warrant. They literally can write it out on a piece of scratch paper and sign it, and it's now an administrative warrant. I did not know that. I probably should have, but didn't. So the fear of ICE and the things that they are doing is real at the community college level. Most of us are serving, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and it has remained on our agendas. We believe in giving people and members of our community a hand up, not a handout, and education, in my opinion, is the way to do that. So I would love to see some additional training and information as it relates to exactly what a warrant is and what needs to be served and what doesn't. I want to just add to my colleagues who mentioned the Basic Training Bureau. I mentioned at the last meeting here that we had a leadership change at CADA and we hadn't had a consortium. Well, we have had a consortium since the last meeting, and our relationship with Basic Training just remains great. And it's because of the open communication of the Bureau. We really have not had any issues where we weren't able to come to consensus. And I attribute that to the professionalism and the willingness of the Basic Training Bureau to communicate with us and try and foresee what problems might come up, and let's deal with them ahead of time. So I thank them for that.
Thank you. So Warren.
Kathy O'Born from KG. Yes, ditto about all of this. It's crazy out there, guys, in the community colleges and the CSUs. It's just unbelievable. The students are so afraid that they're going to get snatched up and deported, and there's signs all over the walls of the colleges and universities telling them to run for administration, and it's just crazy. It really is. Yes, and we are also waiting to see what happens with the modern policing degree, because it's going to affect a lot of our curriculum and how we establish our programs in the community colleges. Thank you.
Miguel Pacheco, CPOA, just a quick message from our director. He just wanted to say thank you to Post. They've had a lot of changes in last minute schedules and class sizes. So we've actually seen an uptick in some of our classes in person. We were struggling for a minute, but he attributes that to Post and the flexibility again with class sizes and reimbursements and getting last minute changes on the book. So thank you.
Cindy Pont, CHP. Again, I'll echo thank you to Post for always working well with us. We appreciate you guys. We had 133 cadets graduate, or new officers graduate on Friday. We have 160 starting Monday. We have 2 classes in there currently. 138 remain that will graduate August 1st. Hopefully we'll keep all of them. And then another class with 144 cadets that graduate October 3rd. So yeah, the 133 that graduated Friday was the largest class we had since February 4th of 2022. So yeah. Yeah, so we'll keep plugging away. Thank you.
Congrats, thank you. Alicia.
Hi, Alicia Rosa from Porac. First off, not from the Porac angle, but from San Bernardino County, I was just asked to relay our appreciation to not only Post, but to the various agencies that gave such outpouring support and condolences to the loss of our officer Hector Cuevas Jr. I also wanted to bring to attention a Porac member from Region 4. His name was Seth Franklin from Redlands Peace Officers Association. He lost his battle with skin cancer that eventually, developed into some other kind of cancers. And so his family, as well as Redlands POA, are actively fighting with the city of Redlands to make it a in line of duty death. And that's been a very tedious task. And I'm sure the reason I bring that up is because it is something that is very real. And it is something that I think every agency, if it hasn't hit you yet, it will hit you at some point. And so it's something to keep on the forefront. We talked about wellness earlier today, and one of the things is making sure that you're taking care of your physical wellness. And I know it sounds simple, but sunscreen and taking care of your skin when you're out there. That's the nature of our job, is not necessarily sitting in an office, but it's also being out there and being exposed to the elements. So unlike CHP, we're still having an issue with recruitment, although it seems to be getting a little bit better with some of our surrounding agencies. San Bernardino Police Department is nearly fully staffed, which is wonderful, because I don't know who would want to work in that city. But hey, apparently there's a lot of folks that want to work in that city. I attribute that to the wonderful chief of police that they have there too. As on the Porac side, we just continue to be very active on the legislative front, both in Sacramento and Washington, D.C., and continue to fight bills that are, deemed or perceived as anti-law enforcement bills. And so we will continue to fight that fight. And, I think we've been successful, and at least in the last year. And it seems that the sentiment from some of our legislators are that they never once thought that it was a good idea to defund the police. So they have a convenient amnesia, I suppose. So that's it from my area of expertise.
Tony Cordova, California Community College Chancellor's Office. To reiterate some of the things that were said earlier, and Member Rosa, I was just admiring, and I say this with all due respect and gratification, the work that you guys do as police officers, as peace officers, as correctional, whatever that is. It's, for me as an outsider looking in, I'm really astonished about the level of detail and the work that goes into everything that you guys do. So from our office to everybody here, hats off, right? The level of appreciation and gratitude. In regards to the California Community College Chancellor's Office, I'll ditto the statements that were said specifically around the colleges itself. I'll pivot a little bit, the governor's office has put out the career education master plan. And if you guys haven't had an opportunity to take a look at that master plan, I encourage to take a look at the master plan as we start to talk about what are the primary emphasis that we're talking throughout the state of California. And I'll highlight the first two. And the first one is the statewide collaborative. So we're looking at trying to really be intentional of developing these strategic partnerships and these collaboratives throughout the state. I say that because level 2 also goes down to the regionalization. So we're going to look at collaborating together on developing these regionalization hubs, more specifically within the sector specific. So can we all come together to increase our efficiency and maximize our output to be able to provide more recruitment, ease of recruitment, and additional students to support each of our pathways, more specifically when we start to sum it up within the public sector. So the public sector as well as public safety is one of our key areas of emphasis that we're working on right now. More to come on that one as we really start to look at what that entails and the development needed behind that. The other thing that I'd like to say is part of that collaboration, I think, I don't know if it's too early to announce, but our next session, right, I was able to get confirmation that we've secured Golden West College as one of our traveling meeting locations, and really want to encourage the community to participate in the events and the activities to get the sense of what it's like for a governance structure to have these type of meetings, and for us to be able to have the opportunity to go visit the academies, go visit what our cadets are going through. I know from my end of it, the further I get away from the campus, the more I lose that connection. I always want to try to make sure that I keep that connection of what our students have to go through on a day-to-day basis. I'll give you an example. I was walking up the other day and I saw the academy out there at 6:30 in the morning in their PT suits, right? So I was like, man, I don't miss that at all. So, but good for you guys, right? Other than that, appreciate the opportunity to be here and participate with the group.
Jim Grockel, just to follow up on Member Cordova's comments about Golden West College and allowing us to host it there. We do really appreciate that. That was on the agenda to thank you for, and just the California community colleges for being open to doing that. It gets very difficult, especially when we have our hearings, to find locations that are both safe and welcoming to post, to potentially bring folks that may not necessarily get along or be on the same side on issues. So we definitely appreciate that. That's going to happen for our September meeting, which advisory does not meet at. And so that's one where it's the commission specifically, and then the hearings that go on. But again, on behalf of Post, thank you very much for that. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. And I'll report out on behalf of the California Police Chiefs Association. Obviously, a lot going on legislatively right now. We are working on the education bill, the K-9 bill. We had a bill that was working on some items with RIPA. That bill is stalled for the time being, but on a number of other topics, e-bikes, drones, all kinds of different things. So busy with legislation. We did, as I mentioned earlier, have a meeting with Post along with PORAC and Cal Sheriffs with regards to SB2 items recently. Cal Chiefs also provides a number of trainings, and we recently held our first course on administration of discipline, which sold out pretty quickly. And if anybody in management knows, there's actually not a lot of training opportunities out there on how to administer discipline and all that goes with it. So there's another offering of that course coming up in October. Our Women Leaders in Law Enforcement Conference is coming up in September. That's in San Diego, and that usually sells out pretty fast. I think we're already at 2,000 registrants, I believe is what it was. And then one of the big items that Cal Chiefs is working on right now is a statewide accreditation program. We've been working on this now for about a year. We obtained a grant from USDOJ to start an accreditation program. Many of you are probably familiar with CALIA, which is a pretty robust accreditation program. It's also expensive. Many states, I think 38 of the 50 states offer usually their chiefs associations or maybe a sheriff association offers an alternative to CALIA in the form of a statewide accreditation program. Cal Chiefs applied for a grant. We obtained that grant. We've hired an accreditation manager, and are working on putting together an option to California law enforcement agencies on a statewide accreditation that would be run through the California Police Chiefs Association. It'll start initially, we're meeting here in Sacramento in July to go over the standards that would be included in the accreditation. We hope to roll that out completely next year. I'm sure it's something that will start small and then probably grow. The focus primarily going to be on patrol and operations, typically some of the more basic functions, but then I imagine that will grow at some point into corrections, dispatch, and other fields that we'd be able to offer accreditation. So keep your eyes out for that as that continues to evolve, and we hope to offer that to agencies throughout the state, whether it's municipal police or sheriff's agency or wherever it may be. So that is on the horizon for us as well, and we're excited about that. Okay, with that, I don't see, do we have any commissioners that are present that would like to comment? I don't see any present. Manny, did you want to make comments? Please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the September meeting advisory does not meet. There was our anticipation for tomorrow. We were anticipating tomorrow to have a discussion about the portability of background investigations, to get their feedback, and then to present that to the commission in September. I will offer to them tomorrow to hold off on a vote until December, so you all get to see whatever direction and regulatory changes might be made. I don't think there's a rush on that, and just based on the feedback from you all today and the feedback they'll give tomorrow, I think it would only be fair to hold that off till December so you all can weigh in on the final prior to the vote. Also in September, just a couple of things, since most of you will miss it, other than I believe the chair. We do obviously invite the chair for that meeting. There's going to be a presentation on instructors. You know, we've talked about instructors and what do we do when we have misconduct by instructors or bad instructors. So we anticipate going back to them in September with some recommendations and ideas. I don't think it's going to be up for a vote for September. And then we're also going to put forward for September, which will not be a vote, information on Regulation 1005, which is peace officer training. As we all know, in the penal code and in Section 830, there's pages and pages of peace officers without, for most of them, without any kind of statement as to what kind of training they should be taking. So I believe the Legal Affairs Bureau, specifically Chief Counsel Darden, is going to make a presentation in September on that, but that will not be up for a vote. So I don't think you'll miss anything in September, and we will make sure to hold off on, or ask them to hold off on any votes that you all may need to weigh in on. And then just lastly, there will be some hearings for them in September. We anticipate at least one full day of hearings. We know we have 4 appeals that will be heard by the board in July and that will go to the commission in September, and we have 9 pending. So it may be 1 to 2 days of hearings on top of the commission meeting, so they will be busy. And I just wanted to add that to let you know that we're going to make sure that you don't miss anything in terms of regulatory votes. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Director Alvarez. Okay, there is no old business for discussion. Are there any items of new business from the committee? Okay, seeing none. Future meetings, as you just heard, the next upcoming advisory committee meeting will be December 2nd, 2025 here at Post Headquarters in Sacramento. And with that, our meeting is adjourned. Thank you.